If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back. I'm excited. We have a flight engineers with us again, and we have a chap here called Mike. I'm trying to say his surname correctly. If I say it wrongly, Mike, correct me or forgive me. Freer, you spell it like Freer, but I suppose it's Freer. And
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And he had a fascinating career, this fellow. And we're going to ask him now, Mike, how did you get into the Air Force? Tell us about your life. I know you're married to an Air Force lady yourself, and we're going to try to get her on here. Madam, if you're listening here, please, we need to hear the female side also. So, over to you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I certainly haven't had a very dazzling career like Stephen has, and probably one of the couple of other flight engineers. Yeah, but my love for aircraft started when I was 2 bricks and a Tikkie High in Springs. And where we stayed in Springs, it was a suburb called Southcourt. And I think we were on sort of long finals to Donato, the Donato Air Force Base, and they were the flying school. So, of course, there was a lot of aircraft in the air on particular days. And I used to marvel at these aircraft looking up in the sky, and, you know, they would have the variable pitch props, and you would hear them, you know, wind those props, and, you know, change the pitch and the noise of the props. And probably as they doing long finals, doing their, you know, vital actions on long finals. But you used to see the guys that as they started getting better and better flying, you know, the aircrafts were more stable. The aircrafts were more, you know, you could see them. They were actually more stable. And I used to get hold of chairs and tables and planks that my dad had in his house, and I used to build an aeroplane in the ground on the back lawn, and I used to get old matchboxes, and I used to put them over my ears as if they were headsets. So yeah, so that started my passion for aircraft. I myself didn't sort of realize that it was from a very young age, but my mom, when she said every time that I went to, you know, nursery school in those days, and we had to draw pictures, 99% of my pictures were those of aircraft or some form of aeroplane. So it wasn't a surprise when I actually joined the Air Force and as to work on aircraft. So my schooling career was also in the Eastern Cape. I went to King Williamstown Dale College. That was due to the fact that my parents belonged to the Presbyterian Church, and one of the hostels at Dale College was the Presbyterian Hostel. So we had sort of subsidy there. So my later years, my high school years were in King Williamstown. You know, then when you're coming to the end of the school career, suddenly you're thinking ahead and you're saying, well, gee whiz, what am I going to do? My academic record probably wasn't the best to go and study at varsity. And also, you know, I think I'm not too sure, but I wouldn't hate to say that funds were a problem, but I don't think they were. I'm sure my parents would have been glad to do it. So I ventured out into this broad wide world looking for some form of work. I applied at SAA and to do technical. Unfortunately, they'd already done their recruiting for 1976. They said to me I could join as a clerk for a year. And then I went to the post office, and funny enough, I got the job at the post office. And as a telephone technician in those days. And the funny thing was that, you know, if you joined the post office, you weren't called up for military training. I looked at that and said, you know, is that my passion? And I actually building little electronic sets that my parents had bought me over the years. I got very involved with radio, and radio has impressed me. I don't know why. It was just something that radio has impressed me, and I always dreamt that I'd become one of these amateur radio transmitters, and I actually built a little transmitter that could transmit sort of about 10 or 15 meters from the little set that I bought. So when I read up or heard about an air traffic controller, that seemed to be something that I felt was my calling. And then it was early late 1975. I met up with an old school pal. We were in primary school together, and his name was Gordon Adlod. And he said to me, no, he's going to apply for pilot's course in the Air Force. So I said, oh, okay, where are you going to go to? So now we had to go to the old Carlton Hotel, Carlton Center in Johannesburg. Anyway, I said, well, I'll come with you, So took all my qualifications that I had, and Gordon and myself jumped on a train, and off we went to the Carlton Center in Johannesburg, and we got to the recruiting agency there, and we weren't interested in any other area of the Defence Force other than the Air Force. So we had an initial interview separately, obviously, and Gordon had applied for a pilot's course, and I applied for ATC. We went back a couple of days later, and we had to do some written exams and tests, etc., etc. And Gordon was then accepted in the shortlist for pilot. And they came back to me and said, no, I think you're more in the technical line, that we feel that you must more go apprentice route. So I then actually remastered on properly, which was disappointing to me, because I really, really fancied the idea of being an ATC. So anyway, I re-looked at things, and my dad was also a metallurgist. And so we had a couple of chats on the technical aspect of things. And then I decided, well, I'll go for either radios or instruments, apprenticeships. When I got to, we were then given our sort of orders to meet at 68 Air School, which was, I think, also later called STT. And a group of us, there were a lot of us. I think we were lunch lizards after a week, walking around there, because it took such a long time. And obviously we wrote all these aptitude tests again, and different ones, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the long and the short of the whole thing, you met up with a lot of the guys, and a lot of the guys were in the same boat as I was. And they called me in, and they said to me, ATC is out. I mean, we've discussed that with you, and I think they just felt that probably my qualifications were not ample enough at the time. Particularly my maths was not the world's best. Stephen also was complaining that his maths weren't very good, and going back to the mid-70s, I can vouch for that. They weren't very good. But anyway, just joking. They then called me in, and they said, look, we'll accept you for either radio or instrument. But what also happened was they took us on different tours of close squadrons around 68 squadrons. So we went to Air Force Base SWAT Corps. We looked around there. They showed us the decks that were there, the Allos, the Pumas, the various. I think there was the Falcons were there. I'm not too sure. I'm talking under correction. And then Waterkloof, and then we sort of went to 28 Squadron, and then 1 Squadron and 3 Squadron or 2 Squadron, the Buccaneers and the F1s, Mirages. But on doing a little bit of research, and the research wasn't much that I could get to, I found that if you became a radio technician or an instrument technician, you couldn't become a flight engineer. The only way you could become a flight engineer was to be an aircraft fitter. So with my hat in hand, I then went to this final selection or final recruiting phase, and I said and it was a Sergeant Major Little at the time. He was very much instrumental in recruiting a lot of the guys, and he was quite technically clued up. And I said to him, is there any chance I could muster as an aircraft fitter instead of the radio instruments? And he said, man, you've got more than the qualifications. We were actually hoping, that you would actually apply for that. And he said, wow, why is this sudden change? So I said to him, well, these tours that we've been taken on, that you guys have taken us on has been so enlightening. And I then saw flight engineers, and seeing flight engineers and asking a couple of the guys that I knew, didn't know, they came and spoke to us, and I then realized that flight engineer was my future career. So once we got our basics done and all our basic training done, our workshop training, our technical blocks that we went to, I was then posted to 28 Squadron. And that was probably the late 1976, I think. So I then started our apprenticeship. I was then put onto C-130s, and I was on the engine crew with, then at that stage, he was a Flight Sergeant Trevor Poppy and Sergeant Eddie Pretorius, and our crew chief was Flight Sergeant Don Brown. Our Sergeant Major, Hangar Sergeant Major, was a guy called JP Mayer. Well, he was a character of note. JP was a very, very professional man. You know, he had his shoes boned and he's changed his shirt 2 or 3 times a day, you know, that type of thing. And I fitted in quite well at 28 Squadron. Look, unfortunately, and I just really remembered a little story that when I finally got up to leave after the interviews, one of I think it was a colonel, called me and he said to me, you know what? He says, just looking at your height and your build, he says, do you like horses? I said to him, why? I said, no, not particularly. I'm very hesitant to climb on them. I did climb on a couple of them in my younger days and fell off them and didn't have the opportunity to volunteer climb off. And he said to me, because you know what, we could get you into jockey school if you're interested. I said, no. I said, no, I think aircraft fitter is the best one. So yeah, I mean, I joined the Air Force. I was quite small, and yeah, I think I grew a little bit later in my Air Force days, but that was because when I was at 28 Squadron, everything was high up, so you had to stretch. I'm not too sure if that was the reason, but yeah, I did put on a couple of inches in my later years at you know, in my sort of after the 18, 19, 20 years. Yeah, so I had some very good memories of 28 Squadron. I mean, we had the opportunity to fly quite a lot, you know, if it was certain training flights. I would say the opportunity in, I think it was 1978, to fly up to the border area to go and do an engine change. We swapped an aircraft and then we had to do an engine change. And we did an engine change in a little town in Angola called Njiva. And I was very impressed with this little town. I mean, it was small. And I know we spent a night stop there in the town at the hotel. And it was very pleasant. I mean, we ordered steaks, and I think our steaks were probably about the biggest steaks that I've ever seen. I mean, the little airport that they had there, and the airport shop was well organized, and yeah, they catered for us very, very well. Anyway, we then flew the crippled aircraft back. Well, we changed the engine, but flew the triple aircraft back. Let's call it. I mean, we had to, you know, so we flew back to Waterkloof, and that was a little bit of my first look at what is happening up in Southwest. You know, and it was I was quite sort of fearful. You know, when they told us we were at Undangwa, we were flying into Angola, and I mean, I thought, well, where's the armed crew? You know, where's all the soldiers that are going to protect us? You know, you think that, you know, these guys are like the movies portrayed. You know, they're the good and the bad. You know, in the bad jump out every bush. You know, but yeah, I mean, I was quite sort of taken back at the barren area. But the beauty of the barren area, you know, it's got its own beauty to it. It's got its own, you know, it's indescribable to people unless you've actually been there, felt that heat, felt that humidity, got the smell of a wonderland a little bit, you know. And it certainly does play a significant role in our lives. So in 1979, I qualified as an aircraft fitter, and then in my Gulliver's travel somewhere along the line, I'd met a guy called Eddie Brown. Eddie Brown was a sergeant at the time, and I think I was a private or lance corporal, And we chatted quite a lot, and he just seemed to be like a father figure to me. And he was a lot older than I was. And gee whiz, goes halfway in 1979, Eddie Brown ends up at 28 Squadron as the chief technical officer, as a captain. So we were quite sort of friendly to one another, him now being an officer and myself. So we couldn't really, enjoy our social life, but we chatted a lot at 28 Squadron. And we chatted about sort of, careers, and he was asking me, where do you see yourself going? But one of the reasons why I also looked at 28 Squadron, because I was thinking, well, that is, and C-130 is an international airplane, and you can hopefully become a flight engineer, going on to SAF Air, or probably getting to the airways, and the airways were using a lot of flight engineers at the time. So that was one of my sort of avenues that I was concentrating on, obviously the Air Force have got their own competency and sort of aircraft licensing system, so that you aren't licensed to actually work and fly on then civilian aircraft, which is a bit disappointing. But anyway, because I think our training, and I know Steve harped on it quite a lot, and I must say, when I did leave the Air Force, and I'm going to jump in the gun a bit, but the reason why I'm saying that is that I actually left the Air Force and went to a well-known company in Port Elizabeth as the training officer. And because of my technical background, and particularly, we got quite involved with welding, and I was got myself technically involved with welding. And I think one of the reasons why I got involved with welding was because of my dad being a metallurgist. And of course, he was then, telling me the properties of materials, and the composition of materials, and how this is welded and that's welded. So I had a little bit of an encyclopedia there with knowledge. So I actually really enjoyed the welding side in the Air Force. So, but I must say that the training that we did was fantastic. A little story that I think is quite pertinent. Yeah, one of the courses that you do is electrical and sort of electrical course, where you must make a little circuit board. So a couple of us had a little bit of a choice, and we actually quite lucky. We did our technical training at the Pretoria Tech. They had a workshop there. So we were staying in town, at a place called Sunnyside in town, and then we would just walk over to the Tech to do our basic hand skill training, workshop training. Anyway, one of the guys, he brought somewhere he found a little electronics board, and he made it, and it then had the sound of a cockroach. So it would squeak like a cockroach. It had a little light sensor on it, and it fitted perfectly into our brown soap dishes. So you had to cut a little hole for the light to get in. It had a little volume control and a little loudspeaker. And we put this thing into a soap dish, and we would put it on top of a cupboard in a dorm, a room with like 6 people. And we used to know some of the guys used to get highly cross. We used to put this thing in there, and about 30 seconds after the light went off, this cockroach started clicking, and then so about a minute later, it got a bit louder and a bit louder. And then, of course, you had these guys, yeah, really, don't is a cockroach. Cockroach, where the hell is it? Where the hell is it? And they would then put on the light, and of course, as soon as the light came on, this thing turned itself off. Boy, oh boy, we had big guys. We had huge guys turning cupboards upside down, not realizing that this thing was in a soap dish, right on his windowsill or right in his cupboard, But we had fun with that thing. We were actually damn naughty with that. We also had an incident where, I don't know if you know these weather balloons. We were apprentices as well with these huge weather balloons. Now that weather balloon is a transmitter, and so it transmits on a very high FN or FN frequency. So we got hold of one of these things, and we opened it up, and we actually then built in a speaker, and we managed to tune this thing down to one of the radio shows. Man, oh man, and we fitted a microphone, but you had to be reasonably close to that. And we used to walk around at 68 and at Waterkloof Air Force Base, the sea lines there, and see which guy was on the radio. And then we used to hone in on him, and we used to call him on the radio, and do all sorts of funny things. Say to him, you better go and find your girlfriend. There's an emergency. We're calling, let's call it Wimpit. We're calling Pit van Rijn. You must go and you find your girlfriend quickly because she's just found the radio station. She can't get hold of you. She thinks she's pregnant. So, yeah, we also used to take our chances in the car. We used to take this thing in the car. And of course, when we were next to some people, we just took the chance and hoped they were on. And I think in those days, it was sort of the Radio 5 or LM Radio, I can't remember. And we used to sit in the car, and if there were some nice girls in the car, we used to tease them. And of course, these girls, I couldn't believe that they were being seen by people, but there was no cameras, they couldn't see. So yeah, so those are the little mischievous things we got up to. I think it was good, clean fun, but yeah, it was hilarious. I mean, nobody got hurt from them, and yeah, it was such good fun on those things. Yeah. So coming back to my days at 28 Squadron, as I say, I was on the engine side because you have the divide between engines and airframes, and airframes are also divided into different sections. But yeah, under the mentorship of, as I mentioned, Trevor Poppy and Henny Pretorius, we became quite clued up on the C-130 engines, and at one stage, we weren't ground running the aircraft, but we were sitting in the cockpit looking at all the startups that we're doing, et cetera, and looking at how to do cockpit fault finding, which was fantastic. Anyway, Eddie Brown eventually came to me and he congratulated me on passing my apprenticeship, which was quite a nice thing because it was in the late 1970. Well, I just had my 21st birthday, and so it was very nice to celebrate knowing that you're qualified now, and the nice thing that we all looked forward to, that your pay was going to go up and it was going to almost double in pay, and our vision was, we always wanted a car, so of course, you wanted a car. And so we were all planning these things, because now you knew exactly what your pay was going to be, and it was now going to be some livable amount. And Eddie Brown came to me and he said to me, Mark, you always said you wanted to become a flight engineer. So I said, yes. He said to me, well, why don't you apply for flight engineer? I said to him, I hadn't even thought about it, and it was virtually sort of within a week and a half of me qualifying. And I said to him, well, Captain, why not? It was 2 or 3 days later, he then came back to me and he said to me, they're actually recruiting for technical officers as chief technical officers. And you can't basically apply for it. You can apply for it, but you've got to be recommended by a technical officer of a squadron, and they've got to motivate the reasons, etc., etc. Well, eventually said he's putting my name forward. I then did the selection of the officers course. To this day, I don't even know if I was selected or not, but I then was accepted as a flight engineer, and that just seemed to be the natural fit, and I opted for that. So there I was on flight engineer's course. 28 Squadron was, those guys were very annoyed because they knew that a lot of their personnel, because of the fact that flight engineers were carried on C-130s and C-160s, they were going to lose those guys to the ground crew, and they'd spent a lot of time and money on us because we went to 1AD where we actually assembled the C-130 propellers and engines. So you spent 3 months there actually assembling those aircraft, those engines. So you could see everything that was in those aircraft, in those engines being turboprop, fantastic motors, very different to obviously a Mirage type engine, because you've got a big gearbox in the front and all your, and really tiny turbines at the back, which, the exhaust pipe doesn't deliver any form of forward power, just makes a lot of smoke every now and again. But from there, we went back to 68 Squadron and we started the intensive flight engineer training of course, that was all a rekindle of the theory of flight. And then, of course, we had to do chopper theory of flight, which was fascinating. And then, of course, we did all the ins and outs of the technical aspect of an LOET. And that's where we all started. Everybody started on LOETs as flight engineers course. So, yeah, very excited. With a bit of also a stressful time because in the February of that year, 1980, I lost my father on the training. And I said to my mom, maybe I mustn't go on this flight engineers course because it's going to mean a lot of time away from home. And my mom said, you go on it, because unknown to me, my dad actually applied for pilot's course in the Air Force in his day, and the South African Air Force pilots were then trained, which I didn't know, in Australia. And he was basically waiting now for the trip to Australia because there weren't aircraft that went on in those days. They had to go by boat. And he one day collapsed at the temporary work he was working with, and then they discovered he had bad diabetes. So that put the end of his career in the flying world, which I didn't even know. So, of course, my dad knew, flight engineers, and of course, he obviously, had read a lot about the war, etc., because it was just, his adolescence year was just post-war. We'll go a little bit older than that. But it was unfortunate that I didn't know a lot about that, because then I would have had a lot of chats with him on that. But he was quite chuffed that I was doing flight engineers course. I still think my dad always regretted that I probably didn't follow in his footsteps. From a professional point of view, I think I could have also, maybe I should have, but that's water under the bridge. Well, anyway, flight engineers course was tough. I mean, it was a tough course. It was in Bloemfontein, and I think I sent one of the little pics I sent to you is, just a little synopsis that has been written on, how tough a flight engineers course is, and I don't think people realize it. I don't think a lot of people, it's just a course you go do. But it was tough. I mean, we were up at 4:30 in the morning at the Squadron, 6 o'clock, pushing out aircraft in the middle of winter. I mean, you couldn't touch the metal. I mean, and we were taking out, 15, 18, 20 aircraft at a time. 9 o'clock, the guys would come and do these sorties, training sorties, and those were new pilots. They were pilots. A lot of them were COs. At the time, a lot of them were pilots that were doing conversion courses from other aircraft, but 80% of them were new pilots that were now remastering into their careers. Instead of going transport or fighters, they went into the helicopter line. So a lot of those guys were our age, and even most of them were probably a little bit younger than us. We get a couple of years being apprentices on them. So a lot of them also battled with the concept of a CO versus a corporal or lance corporal or sergeant. They didn't know where they were actually fitted in the system. And I think that was also something that we ourselves as trainees, UT flight engineers, you also didn't really know. Now all of a sudden, and now all of a sudden, flying solos with these guys. And of course, we got into a lot of trouble because first names appeared. We were calling each other first names. Anyway, I've got my own theory regarding the pilots just being doing an officer's course, and it just seems to be the route in the South African Air Force that every pilot becomes an officer. When you look at other countries and their militaries program and how they go about, who becomes an officer, who's an NCO. And I'll speak a little bit about that in the 1990s, 1989. But anyway, as I say, we used to then finish at 9, 10 o'clock at night, where everybody could only go home once the aircraft were serviceable, and we had sufficient aircraft for the next morning's training. And once we got used to Bloemfontein and we got to know Bloemfontein, man, we had a ball. We used to frequent the Holiday Inn little pub there. We got into big trouble with the teachers ladies teachers training hostel there, colleagues there. We used to sneak the girls out there, and I mean, I can't believe it that we used to then arrive in the middle of the day at 11 at night and sort of go home at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then be up at 4 o'clock to start the next day sorting. Where we had that energy from, only I don't know. Sometimes we would run out a bit of fuel, and we couldn't get into town, so we used to open up bonnets on the side of the road, because Bloemspruit is about 15, 18 k's to the actual town. And then people used to come past, stop, and we say, we suddenly got a technical problem, and they would tow us into Bloem, and we'd say, no, we're going there. So we get a free tow into town. We didn't have to use any fuel. And one time I was low on money, and I was going back to Springs for a long weekend from Bloem, and I sort of got to Parys, and I thought I need to save fuel. So I got a tow to Veronica. Meantime, my tank was full, so I was quite. And those are the mischievous things that we got up to. And I think it was sort of clean fun, but why not if not? As I say, flight engineer, of course, I found it rather tough. We were writing exams on an average once every 2 weeks, and they made it quite clear that if you had one rewrite, that was it. You could rewrite one of the subjects that you failed. If you had another failure, you were washed. And it happened. I mean, we were 19 guys that started flight engineers, and I think we were 8 that qualified. So, the guys did take, some of the guys did take it as a bit of a joke. I mean, we had one of our peers that was like one of my team members, and I think you had his name on your list, but we did gunnery, which was the very last subject that we needed to do. So we had completed all our flying, we had passed all our flying, we had passed our main engineer's exam. I mean, and we had the gunnery to do, and he failed gunnery, and he was washed. So, I mean, he had 2 weeks to go, and funny enough, he was at 28 Squadron 2. So that was, it was tough. So, I mean, at the end of the day, when we went on that parade, you were proud in getting that win. I mean, it wasn't just something that was issued, it was something that you really worked hard for. And I feel 99% of flight engineers that got their wings deserve the wings. They've worked hard for it. And I mean, if you had to ask me 2 years later, somewhere along the line, we're taking your wing away, you need to do the course again, I would say no. I wouldn't do it again. But I would recommend it to somebody, because your post-flight engineer career is marvelous. I think it's, I must admit, I don't think there's one day that I regret flying. I've had some hairy moments, and I've had some hot moments, I've had some really scared moments, but in general, I don't think there was a day that I could say that no, I've lost the fear for flying, that's it, I'm stopping. I mean, even today, I mean, if there's a broomstick with an engine on, I'll climb on it. I don't mind. I'll climb on anything that can fly. I've bought myself a couple of drones, so they're the closest I get to actually flying. But unfortunately, I'm not inside that drone. Would like to be lifted off the air. So of course, I try and get any opportunity to bum a flight here, steal a flight there if I know somebody's doing a little. And I did I did my pilot's course, by the way. I did it at Squadron Air Force Base. I did my on a Cessna 150, and then I did a conversion on the 172, which was quite a nice little aeroplane. Unfortunately, I never actually finished my course, and then I qualified, and then went to 28 Squadron, and then sort of flight engineer's course came along. So I was at this stage, I think I was a little bit stupid not to have finished it, because I think it would have been an asset to me, if I had finished it. But it was very funny, just to go back. We had a guy that had completed his PPL while we were at 68. And when he finished your PPL at Squadron Air Force Base, one of the things is that you join the commander squadron as a commander pilot. And we had a guy that was in our midst. He had finished his PPL. He was still an apprentice. So I think he was a lance corporal at the time. But he had joined the commander squadron, and they made him a 1 per plute. So now you can imagine the confusion. So lunchtimes, he used to take his lance corporal rank off, put on his 1 per plute, and go to the officers' mess for lunch. He slept in the officers' mess, but then at 8 o'clock in the morning, or 7:15, he'd try on with his lance corporal rank, and off we would go doing carrying on with our apprentice. So it was quite funny actually, and you could imagine some of the disciplines. They couldn't work this out. One minute he's checking them, the next minute they're saluting him. So, but I think there was a stop to that. But I think it was quite a funny situation. After flight engineers course, we were then posted to a squadron. I went to 17th Squadron in SWAT Corps. I wanted to go back to 28th Squadron. I did apply to go back to 28th Squadron, and then I got a signal to go to 28th Squadron as a flight engineer, and I was ecstatic. Only to be highly disappointed by the CO at the time. He called us. There were 3 of us that all qualified and all ex 28th Squadron apprentices. He called us in and he said to me, Mike, I looked at your age, I looked at your experience, and I just think that you need to go to C-160s as a flight engineer. I had no clue on the aeroplane other than we just got competency to refuel the aircraft. Although, we sat in the aircraft and we were flying a lot with it, and we did a lot of, we helped out where we could, but I didn't have competencies to do any servicings on that aircraft. Although I still think the C-130 was the cream of the crop. And I was disappointed, and I argued emphatically with him, can I please not become a flight engineer on the C-130? I don't mind, being a load master for a period of time. Anyway, he said, okay, I can do load master. And I did that for I think I flew about 100 hours. And then he called us in, all of us in, and he said, no, guys, you're going on to C-160s. We've got overloaded with C-130s. And what had also happened was that at that stage, load masters were being recruited by CF Citizen Force. And a lot of those load masters were SAA qualified fitters and aircraft techs and all that. So I think it was just a manpower issue. It was, and it made their 2 years a pleasant 2 years, gave them some experience, So a lot of those guys were CF flight engineers and not permanent force load masters, which were, load master was a different thing, but most flight engineers do load mastering anyway, So anyway, most disappointedly, after about 6 or 8 weeks at 28th Squadron, it must have been maybe a little bit longer, off 2 of us went back to 17th Squadron, very disappointed that I couldn't go on to C1s. And anyway, so I couldn't see my career at 17th Squadron. I battled to 15. I didn't enjoy SWAT Corps base, and then I was unmarried, staying in the SWAT Corps accommodation. Just didn't have enough money to commute or buy, rent a flat. It was just out of our financial reach. So I thought, well, the best thing is maybe let me go. I'll resign and look for some other alternative work, which I did find alternative work as a hydraulic technician, which was very, very interesting. And also, I went overseas in 1975 for a period of time. And when I came back, that was my long-term decision, was to say, I want to go overseas for a year. Now, joining PF, that created a major problem, because how do you do that? And of course, while you're apprentice, I weren't going to give you, any long-term leave. So during my apprentice years, I started accumulating my leave. So after about 7 years, I had almost sort of 4 to 5 months accumulated leave. So then I said, no, I want to take 6 months unpaid leave and 6 months leave. Well, you can imagine, now being a flight engineer, that was totally turned down, because now we were in the thick of it up north and the manpower was needed. So I was very disappointed. And then I had about 2 months to go when I was going to leave to go to this company that that was going to employ me in Johannesburg area. They asked for volunteers to come down to Port Elizabeth. That was 1982. And I'd taken about 3 months leave as well. And I did a bit of a tour around South Africa. I had an absolute ball. In those days, it was fuel rations, and we couldn't get fuel at night, and we could only carry a certain amount of fuel. But we had worked quite closely with some of the police units in I think it's Croppersdorp. And I met one of the policemen there that was involved with that heist in Pretoria, where they smashed the front window. It was quite a heist. Anyway, that window was in their like police little barracks. I think it could have been Kufut. I think I can't quite remember anymore. But anyway, he said to me, if you're going to go on the trip, I'll give you a letter that you can get fuel at. So I had this letter to say that I was on a special ops and that I was entitled to fuel, and also that I could be accommodated in any SAP units, that I could be accommodated, and that I'm on the special ops. So I had it all. I mean, I went from Springs, I went to Volfus, St. Lucia, because we had done a bit of work in St. Lucia, all the way down. In those days, we couldn't go through the Transcar, but I went into Cisco, wasn't there then, and ended up in P with one of my late mate, Les Beerge. We did actual flight engineers course together. And funny enough, I ended up in Cape Town when the President Kruger sank. In that particular day, we ended up in Cape Town. And I went to these little towns, and I would get fuel and put my fuel in my 20-liter can that I had. And the garage owner said, where are you going? I said, no, I'm going to that little town. No, come spend the night with us. So of course, I would go with the garage owner, spend the night in his house, and it was a ball. I mean, the old tuddies there, certainly the West Coast, they knew how to spoil you. They would make up a little breakfast bag and a little picnic bag for you, and I would go off for it, and it was all homemade stuff. One of them even asked me to be an MC at a wedding. And here I was, no public speaking experience, no nothing, but just the hospitality of those people on the West Coast. It was amazing. And then, as I say, I got back to 17 Squadron, having completed used a little bit of my leave, and gearing up to leave the Air Force. And I then there was a signal that came out looking for guys to come and help training in Port Elizabeth, and they were looking for a couple of flight engineers. So being not married, not enjoying the scenery at Sarkov's, I put my hand up. I said, yes, when can I leave? So off I went. I came down in my own transport because I've been leading transport, and clocked in at 16 Squadron, and we started the training, and that's were more sort of conversion courses for pilots that were now remastering into the helicopter lines, and of course some of the co-pilots on Pumas and freelance were now getting their command on allos. So they did these. So we did a lot of training here in Port Elizabeth. Man, I think I felt like a duck into water here. I really enjoyed the base. I really enjoyed the people. I just enjoyed the environment I was in. I stayed in a couple of the provided quarters that were made for us, and eventually I got a flat, which was then marvelous, because then I was like a civilian going to work, just in uniform. Well, I must admit that was May. That must have been about March 1982, and in May 1982, I asked them if I could stay here permanently, and and I've been here ever since. So now 16 Squadron, that was great. I mean, we had some real characters in the squadron, ground crew guys, flight engineers, pilots. But it opened another dimension, which I don't think a lot of people understand, and that's the sea rescue dimension that opens up here. And it looks easy, but when you're flying over the sea, you've got a mass that's opaque, semi-opaque, and it's moving. So a flight engineer's skill over the sea is of paramount. I mean, it's just something, that the pilots totally have to rely on their flight engineers and on certainly all our military aircraft. Excuse me. So we met a lot of guys at the Sea Rescue Institute that we did a lot of training with, and we used to frequent their stations a lot. Got very involved with them. Unfortunately, we couldn't join them because we were on the flying side, But I was very determined that the sea rescues and all the other institutions that we dealt with, we had the mountain climbing club, you had the as I say, sea rescue, and the other types of voluntary emergency units that you had. I sort of got the feeling that, the aircrew were your pilot at Superior. I mean, he was vital to everything, the Air Force pilots, the Air Force pilots. And I challenged them a couple of times, and I'd say, what about inviting the flight engineers and the people that were waiting for us at base, the ground crew? They played a very significant role. And I voted very much for the ground crew. If there was any time, I would, always stick up for the ground crew, no matter what. Because I just feel that their function was so important, not only to me, being a flight engineer, but the maintenance of the aircraft, etc. Although we spent a lot of time maintaining our aircraft, they did the more complex services. So we had to rely on them, and we had to make sure that these guys, I just felt they needed those boosts every now and again. The pilot was always going to be the hero, like the surgeon's always the hero, but we never give acknowledgement to the nurse in the operating theatre. So I voted a lot for them, and I mean, I remember one year I got into huge trouble with the OC when the Sea Rescue invited the pilot. So I wrote a letter back to them. I said, the ground crew and flight engineers will be boycotting your function because we haven't got an invitation. Well, I got into big trouble for that. Big trouble for that. Couple of incidents. You'll see that one photograph that's quite blurred that I showed you. You'll see there's an officer commanding standing behind me. That's Rod Pennell. He was a commandant at the time. And there's a civilian guy. Now, that civilian guy belonged to NOSA. And what happened was he was coming to give me a lifelong certificate or membership to NOSA for using safety equipment that saved a life. And that saved my life. An elevator just come out of servicing, and I don't know if you know the elevator structure. It's got a little panel that you undo at the bottom, and half the floor collapses when you're doing hoisting, because the hoist will foul with the side of the aircraft. So you've got to drop this floor to do hoisting. So anyway, we prepared the aircraft. We were going to go and do a sortie in our general flying area. And it was a fairly new aircraft that had just come out of servicing. So I dropped the hatch. I took the cover off. I dropped the hatch, got my weight into the aircraft, and I made sure that we also had a cogger sling. It's a square sling that you clip underneath the aircraft. And also it's got a cable that if you need to have emergency jettison, you can jettison your load. The pilot can, and the flight engineer can. So we went into the area and we did our hoisting, and we did probably 40 minutes of hoisting, and then we did cogger swing. Now, to line the aircraft on the floor of the aircraft to do cogger swing, it was a bit small. So we used to lift that hatch. And in the hatch was a hole in the hatch that you could look through and see your weight and talk back to the pilot. So we would swing a cogger pole, a big pole. So your cable is probably good 6 to 8 meters from the aircraft, and then the pole. So you can imagine you've got to pay to the pilot. As you lift the pole, you've got to pay to the pilot to get the pole vertically stable under the aircraft before you pick it up and move. Well, we picked the pole up, and the next minute, the pilot and his student didn't know what was going on. I also didn't know what was going on. But the next minute, I was hanging up the aircraft at about 300 feet next to the pole. and my monkey chain saved me. This hatchet collapsed. But of course, you can imagine the pilots didn't know what happened to their flight engineers. They had no clue where I was. They couldn't see me. They didn't know where I was. Meantime, I was dangling under the aircraft. Bit of hunchback there. It can't grab onto anything because I was just too far from the aircraft wheel. Anyway, they came back into the sortie. They decided to eject us in the pole, which was probably a good thing or bad because they couldn't see the pole anyway. So they got into the area, ejected the pole, and then they landed quite carefully. And next minute, I sort of got up off the floor, plugged my microphone in and said, well, that was a sortie of some difference. So you can imagine I was teased a lot. But the officer commanding then, because we were quite involved in those, then forwarded my story to the NOSA, and NOSA then gave me some recognition on it. But and you belong to the Skilpad Club. They called it the Skilpad Club. So I was one of the few guys that belonged to the Skilpad Club. As you probably know, we did quite a lot of ops with the SAP. We did quite a lot of ops in the Ciskei area. We also did ops in the Transkei area, and those were called Dacha opses. And they were fascinating. I mean, we would go away for 2-3 weeks at a time, and I can tell you what, we didn't even make a dent in some of the Dacha fields that we saw. But I tell you what, those people that grow their Dacha, the level of ingenuity is fantastic. I mean, the way they get water to their Dacha plantations is amazing. So we used to start very early. First light, we used to fly out the first sticks of police cars and sometimes with dogs, etc., etc. But we used to fly out a 5-man stick into the area, and we'd be 3 helicopters. We'd fly out probably 20 sticks each, and by 9:30 we would start taking out their rations for the day, and by 12 o'clock we would start bringing those guys back in. That's 3 o'clock when we were finished because it was hot. And then 3 o'clock when we were finished, we wanted to go and find some more Dachas. So we used to take a couple of the space ops, the sun up guys, and we used to go to the kraals and do inspection of the kraals. And we had some funny incidences in those kraals. Hilarious incidences. But we found a lot of dry Dacha, and a huge amount of dry Dacha. And I mean, Dacha is quite an interesting plant. I don't know if people have got it now. Maybe now that we've got the license to grow it at home, people that are now more knowledge on it. But you get a 3-foot, 4-foot Dacha plant, you pull it out with one hand. It's got a very, very bad root system. And we were just flying helicopter fuel to burn it. Just once those leaves have been damaged, then you can't do much with it. I recalled one trip to Gala Ferry. We were in like a revetment on the river, and we had the guys doing, the chefs came from Durban, and a lot of the police chefs were Indian chaps. So they only knew one thing, and that's curry, 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 and it must burn. Must burn, not burn your mouth, burn other parts of your body as well. So you can imagine. One night in the middle of the night, we heard help. Next minute we run out, about 3 of us run out, and here's one of the Indian chefs in this river, which wasn't wide. I mean, 30 foot, maybe 20 meters, I'd say 30 meters, but it was quite a sort of corner, the way the corner of the river. This guy caught a monster barbel in the catfish. I mean, it fitted in one of those galvanized buckets, those drums that we use to keep our frosties cold. Now he knows how to cook barbel. He knows how to prepare it. He says, you won't even know if you're eating barbel or not, the way I prepare it. Well, after 2 days after the sortie, we used to go to the police tent, and then we used to have a couple of beers, and they would make snacks. Next thing, the cook comes out and he says, guys, did you enjoy all that? He says, because that was the barbel I caught 2 days ago, and it was fantastic. It was really fantastic. Another incident when we hit the sort of more dry season where the dach, I don't think, was growing as widely as it does in the summer season. So we actually got a lot of dry dach. And so the guys cut the pit, must have been about 1 meter deep and 2 or 3 meters wide. And they made fires in there, and all the dach, the dry dach that we had that we didn't catch anybody that wasn't being used for evidence was then thrown into this pit. But this pit snuffed the fire, and somewhere along the line we got sent 2 drums of F-gas fuel. Now, F-gas fuel is made for your piston engines, and we put in at the coast here 95 or 98 octane fuel. A piston engine runs on 100 to 130 octane, so it's a very, very highly inflammable type fuel, and obviously efficient for aircraft. So we took one of these drums and poured it into this crater that we had, about half the drum. And one of the guys just wanted to strike a match. And boy, oh boy, we were so close. Standing on the corner. Eventually, we took some of the fuel. We made a little trail about 30, 40 meters away from this hole. And then we set it alight. But I tell you what, you cannot believe the explosion that this thing did to that dry dach. But that thing burned for about 4 days. And I think everybody had their turn at mixing the dach down with that. You can imagine, with just a thick plume of smoke. Yeah, so yeah, dach ops were fantastic. We did a Transkei trip where won't elaborate too much, but those that know, there was what they call the crayfish ops, where we got into trouble with the crayfish ops, but there was quite a bit of sensitivity on that, but there was that maybe for another time, or for somebody that would like to be enlightened a little bit more on the crayfish ops. But yeah, we did get into a bit of trouble on that time. In 1985, being a PE, we heard that we were getting Pumas. So we were sort of thinking, oh well, they're going to send their own flight engineers and crews down. And I was then asked by the officer commanding, Commandant Rodbino, if I'd be interested in conversing over to Pumas. It wasn't really. It was one of these voluntary things that you have to do. Anyway, I was quite chuffed because although we wanted to stay on Allows, because Allows, in between all this, we had done quite a lot of trips up north. And because I was single, it didn't really worry me. And of course, it also, for me, it was also a bonus because I sort of ended up paying off my house. Every time I went for a trip, I ended up making a sort of double payment on my bond. So I was happy because my bond was coming down quite nicely, and I bought a house at 25, and my objective was by the age of 35, I wanted to pay my bond off. So I was cruising at that stage, to pay my bond off. So I was also quite happy to go up and do some of the trips and all that, because it benefited me not being married at the time. So 1985, off we go. There were 4 of us that were selected from the base. The late Les Beertger, retired Piet Els, and Vickers Venter, who also retired in the Air Force as a lieutenant colonel about a year ago. I think he retired. Off we went to Pretoria, to 19th Squadron, to start our flight engineers course. And the one photograph that I've sent you is the course members on the course that we did. We were doing our training. That was about a 6-month conversion course. We had good fun. A lot of the flying that we did was obviously Puma commander training, and also probably co-pilot training. And of course, at the same time, we were doing our flight engineer conversion. Very, very different from Alouettes. Your role on Alouette is a vital, but I'd say it's a sort of flying wise, it's a very much observation role. Other than when you're in when you're doing the work of maybe hoisting, cargo slinging, etc. where Puma, the flight engineer, plays a very, very important role. He starts the engines, he makes sure that they started correctly, because there's a method in starting them, etc., etc. We open the engines up to get from ground idle to flight idle. We then hand over to the pilots, basically. And when we do after takeoffs, pre-takeoff, pre-landing checks, we are involved in them. So the co-pilots and the pilot, the pilot would read all the co-pilot would read all the vital actions, and we would then have to say check, guess, on, off, whatever the case may be. And I enjoyed that. That was what I was wanting and getting out of being at maybe 28 Squadron. When you fly the C-130 panel, you play a huge role in the actual function of the aircraft. So you're a three-man team. And that's what I enjoyed, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed some of the sorties that we did. I suppose I don't know if it's a good thing or the bad thing, but the Puma had night flying capabilities where the Allo doesn't. The Allo, and he would fly in controlled spaces, and also 95% of the time if you had a full moon, where the Pumas had night flying assistant, and all the night flying instruments are not relied on any form of electrical power. They're all static based instruments. So that's an aircraft that is given night flight rating that needs to have instruments that are static. So forward air is air that's blown into a little pitot tube, which gives you your forward speed. Your altimeter is obviously, tells your altimeter. So there are a lot of instruments that are operated with no power. And the more of those in the aircraft gives you the more sort of rating that you can fly. Also, can tell you whether you're climbing or descending, or which way what wing low or not wing low. I mean, it's like a water level that we have, in the aircrafts that we can indicate whether you're flying skew or not. So that also put us on a lot of standbys, and of course not like Allos when we were on standby, but at night you can indulge a little bit and have a party, but of course Pumas you couldn't have. The one photograph that I sent you there, you can see me sitting in the boys's chair on the Puma. That's the late Les Beatra behind me. And then you'll see Rod Pino shaking a little. I think it was Indonesian. We had a call out at about 3 in the morning. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible day. There was on one of the merchant navy ships, this guy got badly injured, and we were requested to go and take him off the ship. It was a gale force wind when we got out there. We couldn't establish comms with the ship because we couldn't even see them half the time because the water was so rough. Now we couldn't wait for any of our NSRI. Normally we wait for NSRI or a doctor, those type of things, because it was so urgent. We left, and one of us had to go down we hoisted down onto the ship. So Les and myself went sort of rock, paper, scissors, and guess who lost? Hey, me. Sure, I tell you what, that was an experience that I think today I still have a little nightmares on. I mean, when we looked at the guy on the ship, we saw that he was in a chair, so therefore he wasn't a lying casevac. So we decided to bring him up in a strop. I was in that person's chair, put him, and I actually had the stretcher, the fold-up stretcher on my back, which I then jettisoned at the last minute. And I went down in the bosun's chair with the strop, which I think was the wrong thing to have done. I should have got another bosun's chair and put him in. Anyway, there was so much movement between the sea and the wind and everything. It was like I was like a cork on the end of this cable, and we were probably about 160 foot off the ship. The aircraft was. I went flying onto the ship, and it was a coal ship, which were transporting coal, and their regulations or rules is that they've got to open up the hatches on coal if any aircraft coming here. I think they have got big, huge methane detectors, but it would build up quite a lot if they had their hatches open. So I don't know if you've ever been on one of these ships, but the cogs that open these hatches are huge. They're probably 24-inch diameter cogs that run on parallel to the hatches. Well, I went careering into one of these and then dislocated my thumb because I couldn't stop. I stopped with my legs, but the other had now this sore thumb of me. I eventually got this guy, put his kit onto the end of the hoist, put him into the strop. But as I got him in, I secured him in, we shot off that boat like a cork. I mean, we got off that. Within about 4 or 5 seconds, I looked down, and that ship was probably about the size of a matchbox. We'd probably climbed about 3,000 to 4,000 feet. And that's what you do is to stop your swinging. You lift, you accelerate quite high at a very high speed, and that controls the swinging. It controlled it to a certain amount, but we were swaying so much that I could see the pilot's face quite clearly as we swang, and then the back of the aircraft as we were swinging. Anyway, Les did a good job and got me into the aircraft, but it probably took about 15 minutes, sitting at about 7,000 or 8,000 feet. I mean, I think we then made George Airport where we refueled, and there was a medic there that then said, no, he's fit enough that we can bring him to Port Elizabeth. I think one of the advantages having the Pumas in the Eastern Cape area was that we could do, a sort of mass deployment. I gave our search and rescues mountaineering team a lot of more flexibility. We also did a lot of flood rescues where we could go onto the local farms and record one period. I think there's a photograph of myself, which I'll try and find. As I said, in those days, cameras weren't the in thing. Not very many people ran around with cameras, and those cameras that they had were Instamatics. And basically we weren't really allowed to have cameras, but then it was quite expensive to go and get film produced, So we used to sort of take a snap, I never had a very, very good camera, but I was never into never ever thinking of taking photographs of different scenes or things that we had. I know my one good friend, Gary Golding, he took photographs, I think even of poppy seeds or dacha seeds or something like that, that not me. So I've got a very small, photograph album of a lot of things, which is sorry, just harping on that. If someone had said to me many years ago, do yourself a favor, keep a weekly diary. Man, oh man, you could write books. I'll tell you what, we could write books, but we don't do that. We don't keep a memoir. And I think those people that have the intuition of keeping a memoir, and they can put it down in paper, and like Stephen's done, and a couple of the others. I mean, I read Neil Ellis's book, The Gunship, and I know Neil Ellis quite well over the years of flying with him. Excuse me. Yeah, so we did a lot of that type of work. We went to Elliot once a year. We would deploy the whole squadron. Had some fun in Elliot, and that was also flying with the commandos, doing quite a lot of sorties, but mainly it's all for emergency constituencies. A lot of farmers, they had a lot of respect for the Air Force at the time and the sort of police units, because they knew that they were getting quick protection if they needed it. And of course, in that time of the 1980s, we were heavy into sanctions. So we were not the most popular around when you went into some of the rural areas, and there was a lot of stones thrown at us and things like that, So we had to be very careful. I mean, if we got into these type of situations. I recalled one very funny incident, and this will probably go down in history, I think. The chief, the HQ of the Air Force decided to separate the servicing squadrons and the actual first line squadrons. So they created a technical base where on the base where they serviced the aircraft. So they did like second line and third line servicings, and we as flight engineers with a handful of guys, we maintained the first line servicings, and that was basically where getting the aircraft ready to fly, etc., etc. So because they were being transferred out of 16th Squadron, they were now going to be transferred to the base. We had to obviously have a farewell party, although they were just going, a couple of steps down the road. And that was our sort of written in policy that if you had spent time on the base, you would then have 3. If you had a year, I think you got a tie. If you had 2 years, you got a pen. And if you got 3 years, you had a pewter mug, one of these glass bottom pewter mugs with your name engraved on it. So we had to now buy these things and have this little party. So we organized all of the snacks. And it was quite a big thing because there was quite a lot of guys that were leaving. We were in the pilot's crew room, and so it was quite full. Everyone chatting before the actual ceremony started. And my friend that used to give me a hard time, or Blackie Swat, he saw me and he said, "Hey, you see that suitcase there?" So I said, yeah. It was against one of the chair, the leg of the table. It was a briefcase, it's a square briefcase. And he said to me, "I bet you won't dance on it." So I looked around to see my friend, a flight engineer that I know, and he had, I believed it was his suitcase. So of course, Blackie threw it on the floor. I danced on the suitcase. Well, I tell you what, within about 3 seconds, that whole crew went totally silent. Where the OC of the squadron at that stage, Commandant Pennell, went, "My God, in a loud voice, did you see what Freya's just done?" And he went, no, yes. And he stormed across, and it was like the people parted like Moses parted the water, as he stormed across to our stadium. But of course, I put the suitcase back, and he said, "You didn't see what he did. You didn't see what he did." Then he said to me, pulled his suitcase, stood on the floor, and he said, "Come on, show the people what you did." So I did it again. So I wasn't very popular. I broke his suitcase. So when Commandant Pennell left the squadron and was being transferred, I said, "There's only one present we give the commandant at the time." I said, "Guys, we have to buy a very, very good suitcase," which the guys did. They built a buffalo skin suitcase, and I was not allowed to touch that suitcase. Under no means was I allowed to touch that suitcase. We went with a crew to a place called Squadron, and we put up a marmot tower, one of these towers that we had to install. It was a 3-legged tower, and his suitcase was with, but he had wrapped it up in bubble plastic, and he had put it in the back of the Puma. And he said to me, "If you ever touch that, if you just touch that suitcase, I'm going to touch you." And there was no ways I was going to touch the suitcase, even though I was instrumental of making sure that he was given this very, 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 very nice suitcase. And I'm sure being buffalo hard, it cost us quite a bit of money at the time. Obviously my border trips were now completely different, going up to Southwest in the Pumas. Had a couple of incidences where we went out into the west, stayed at Murray and Flush for a couple of days, also doing a lot of trooping. Then they needed a generator from, I think it was it could have been the Gullis or something, I can't remember now, or one of the our military ships. And of course, they sent a crew over to try and get this thing off the ship, and they didn't know how. I mean, the pilot wasn't sea competent, nor was the flight engineer. So it took them a while to get this thing off, and I was very cross because I said, "Here I am, right here. I could have done that thing in half the time, and far less fuel, less compromise, all sorts of things there." I recalled one trip that we had to go over to the cut line in the Rakana area. It was quite a hot feeling. It was a very emotional casevac that we had to do. It was a convoy that had been ambushed, and they weren't really infantry fit. They were, they had the sappers that more protected them and the bats and all that. And these guys got a hiding there. It was just northwest of Rukana. So we got called out, and obviously we were 2 aircraft. We had quite a lot of medics on board, and we eventually found these guys, but we couldn't land together. We had to land 1-1 because of the confined space that we had. So we went in first because the casevacs, the medics jumped off the aircraft, and they were starting to bring casevacs in. And at about 15 casevacs, some were lying casevacs, some were sitting, some were badly injured. So say, some that didn't look injured. I mean, there was a youngster on the aircraft that just had a bad wound on his head. And the doctor said to us that he's taken shrapnel in that head. He says, this area of the head, now how true it is, he says, his brain will never mature from there on. That's all he had on him, was this laceration with this bit of shrapnel sticking out, but it could see it penetrated into the brain, but it had no fatal issues on that, but there were some guys that were bad. We had to go. I couldn't find the medic. I ran around the aircraft. I wasn't going to leave the aircraft too far. Of course, we were now at basically almost exceeded our max all-up weight. And of course, we were in enemy territory. We didn't know where these guys were. I think at that stage, I don't even think we had top cover from the allies at all. We did a power lift where you corkscrew out of the landing area to give you extra power. We sort of then waited for the next aircraft to go in, and somehow, somewhere along this medic that we had got left behind. And he was dealing with some of the guys on the ground that weren't that serious. And it wasn't a day after we heard that these poor guys had been in another skirmish, and this poor medic had been fatally wounded. On that particular trip, the doctors were telling us, how long, how far, to get to Ndangwa. And we said, well, it's quite a flight, So we then decided to land at Rukwana, and we radioed forward because we needed blood. So we had radioed forward and said, guys, please get blood to us on the helipad. I mean, it was quite emotional because the ambulance was standing on the threshold of the helipad at Rukwana, and there must have been about 15 or 20 guys standing in queue to donate blood. So that must have taken probably 25 minutes at the most to assemble the guys to start giving blood. We then took off with a couple of extra pints of blood, but this one guy was bleeding so profusely that the doctor said, guys, I need another pint of blood. We said, how critical is it? He said, it's critical. We need it in the next 10 minutes. I said to him, what blood group is he? He said, A positive. I said, I'm A positive type. So he just took a pint of blood from me, basically. I mean, I don't think it was out of me when it was now pumped into this guy. I mean, what can you do in that situation? I know flying crew shouldn't get blood, but what do you do? I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know the guy, never met him before, I never have met him, but, at least you can, I know somewhere along the line out there, some guy got saved from, that doing that action, which gives you a lot of satisfaction at the end of the day. I spent a lot of time at Rundu doing the night ops up into following the Kwita River. Quite interesting, those trips where, you're flying with quite a few guys on board, you're flying with extra fuel, you get into these areas where the guys are desperate to get home. They've been told that if there's space, they can go. And the sad thing is, you're leaving at 2 o'clock in the morning, you've been there quite some time. Now's the time to leave before first light. And, the guys come on board, and you've got to kick one or two of the guys off because we're too heavy. And that the expression on some of those guys' faces, you'll never forget. We had an incident. I was flying with a pilot called Major Basson, and he had given us a sort of debrief saying, if there's any form of emergency, like you as a flight engineer, which was normally what we did, was we would, either lift the undercarriage or lower the undercarriage. And he said, if we drop below a certain speed, or we have a bit of emergency, I want you to lower the undercarriage. So we had picked up these guys, and we had quite a full pack of guys on board. Obviously we did a lot of resub and bringing these guys out. And we heard this major bang. Jeez, it was a huge bang. You can imagine some of the guys at the back, they nearly flipping died from heart attack on this bang. Anyway, we didn't really know what it was, and we couldn't go and land. I mean, it was pitch black. We couldn't just land anywhere. We looked at all the behavioral characteristics of the aircraft. We couldn't find anything wrong with the aircraft. We slowed down a little bit, and I sort of tried to look on the outside of the aircraft, but I couldn't see what I was looking at, doing a little bit of dangling out a little bit. But eventually, and seeing the aircraft was performing, it had no performance problems, we had no technical issues, we carried on. But what happened was, with the bang, he slowed down. Because with him slowing down, I then put the undercarriage down. And with the undercarriage, we then noticed that we had a big yaw in the aircraft, and the pilot lost a bit of, we got sloppiness in the controls. So he put the undercarriage up. Again, we had the sloppiness, and I noticed that the one hydraulic system, there's a big fluctuation of hydraulic fluid. Unfortunately, we got two backup systems on the Puma. So the second system was basically doing all the work. But we then decided to land at the first base that we could, which was 3-2 Battalion, Buffalo. So in the middle of the night, here we were. When we put the undercarriage down again, we only got 2 greens, not 3 greens. So the pilot hovered over the helipad in dark. And I was going to jump out and then guide him down with a torch so that he could land. But I wasn't sure whether that only leg or that undercarriage was working. I don't know where it came from, but there was a tire lying on the side of the helipad, and I picked up this tire, rolled it onto the helipad, allowing the pilot to land the aircraft, and we instructed him down. But I think he must have dropped me about 40 foot because I hit the deck quite hard. But anyway, I managed to get the aircraft down, and once we shut off and everything, we then found that one of the wheels had burst in the undercarriage. Once the wheels were ejected in the undercarriage housing, and it had blown off the hydraulic transmitter that would then allow hydraulic fluid in and out. So so I didn't have enough fluid. We don't carry a box of spares, and I didn't have enough fluid to top up that particular system. And I then heard that the G5 cannons were sitting at 3-2. So I went to the 3-2 commander there, and I asked him I said to him, I know you use the same hydraulic fluid that the Puma uses. Is there any chance you can give me a tin? He wouldn't. So anyway, about 2 hours later, I ended up with the aircraft with the tin of hydraulic fluid. I won't tell you where it came from, and I won't. But anyway, we managed to do a temporary repair, and we then creepily flew the aircraft back to Ndama. But after spending the night, and when I woke up in the morning, I couldn't believe the beauty of Buffalo. I mean, it was an absolute beautiful, beautiful base. I mean, it was really, we'd also done a couple of trips into southern Angola. I had the privilege of landing at Jumbo, and I must say, impressive. That's all I can say. The whole system was just highly impressive. I mean, we did a tour. Every single thing that you can think of is kept. I mean, the woodwork department that they have there, they make butts for rifles that they've captured. The shavings they keep. They obviously do a lot of ivory trade. They had hundreds and hundreds of bags of shaved ivory. They had departments. They had a hospital that they created. The guy that was the doctor there, he had been sponsored by an American company to do his doctorate in the US, and then it was just experience. I mean, he had a couple of surgeries that they had created. They were black plastic surgeries. Obviously, in the local pop of that area, there's obviously a lot of pregnancies, and the midwives are just experienced nurses that they get there. So their labs were very bland, not a lot of equipment, but it was an eye opener, and to see how these guys utilized everything. Everything was precious. Nothing was just taken for granted. it was a big culture shock to me. I mean, I remember we had a function that night, and obviously they had the Red Cross there as well, which a lot of German women missionaries had come out. The Cuban side, which we also met a couple of their East German missionaries, some lovely ladies that were there that we met in some of the Angolan towns that we went into. But they were the East German, the communist guys, and they were with all the Cubans and the East Germans, etc. But yeah, at Jumbo, that area, they were all West German, and a lot of Dutch nurses were in those areas as well. I remember getting into trouble at Mjiva when I went back to Mjiva. I couldn't believe the state of the Mjiva. It was just totally taken out. And the hotel was then a Red Cross center. But coming back to Jumbo, when we went to this function, prior to that, they had troops on the field. They must have had 1,500 troops on the field. And around it was the local pop of probably about 30 to 40 deep around the circumference of this circular arena, if you want to call it as such. Absolutely incredible. And they stayed there the whole day in that baking sun. Those troops did not move just about. There were obviously a couple of them that went on the orchard. But the dedication of those people was fantastic. I mean, that night they dispersed and we went. And we were probably about 35 whites in total that were there in this whole area of this arena, with people, and they were having a fest. It was like a carnival, and I was dreaming sort of Petra Tiff days, But the hospitality was brilliant, and I remember us coming back to our little mud hut. And I mean, you can't believe how cool these things were and how well they were maintained inside. And they offered us a couple of bottles of wine, and there was one particular bottle of wine that we all fancied. It looked like a light bulb. And we're all going to draw sticks now. Who's going to? Sorry, are you there? We were all keen to get this bottle of wine. Anyway, we drew shortest match. And someone said, no. Listen, why don't we share this one? So we all duly opened it and we shared it. It wasn't that pleasant. But then we drew matches to see who's going to keep the bottle. And wow, I think it was Commandant Marty Ferreira, if I remember correctly. He was looking at this bottle and we said, well, now we've got a real special bottle here. It's a unique bottle to take home. On the side of the bottle, it was bottled in South Africa. So the bottle was thrown away. But I mean, we went to a sawmill there that you can't believe. I mean, in their I suppose region that they took possession of. I mean, they'd marked trees. The horticulturist department had gone out and marked trees. That these trees were not allowed to be touched. These trees you could take for wood, for domestic purposes, for firewood, and these colored trees were now for furniture. Would make only they could give authority to cut those trees down. And I mean, it was for miles and miles. They had these trees all marked. I mean, you couldn't understand why these trees were marked. We used to fly over these trees and so you'd see these markings, and they were big, meter circumference around the trees. And then they explained this to us, that this was the horticulturist department or the forestry department. So all in all, they were pretty structured, very well structured. Savimbi himself was quite a man. We never saw a lot of him, but when we did have the opportunity, particularly at that function, I mean, he was quite a spirited guy. He didn't obviously say much because it was repetition, but then again, we went as a flying crew. We went there to visit him. We were there to take the dignitaries to him. So in the 1988, I think it was late 88, being at the base, maybe I'll go there to the story of when we arrived. Pumas were there. And what we need to design is, we get it, one of the flight engineers, one of the technical guys, but it's mainly the flight engineers. What we got to do is design what we call a mobilization kit. And the idea of this kit is that we pack spares for a night stop, and we pack spares for a 3-day stop, pack spares for a 7-day stop, pack spares for a 20-day stop, and thereafter it will be a squadron deployment. And what do we need to have of these spares? So these spares are then kept in the store. They're highlighted in the store, and they mark that if there are 3 in the box, in the pigeonhole in the stores, and 2 are for the mobilization kit, the storeman can only issue 1 if you need to. So that stock has to stay in the spares, all the time. And to be able to highlight these spares in the system, the Air Force had the store system, and the only time we could really actually access the store's system was to do it at night, because the system was linked all over to the same system. So all Air Force stores around the country were linked to the same system. And so everyone got on the system. It became very cluttered. And I suppose in the 85 zone, the systems weren't anywhere near to what they are today. So it's probably an old SAP or Barnes type of system, maintaining your infantry. So being put in charge of this mobilization kit, I then had to now get the stores now to cooperate, and we could only go at night. So I had the lady that was in charge. She was a sergeant, I think, at the time, of flight sergeant, I can't remember, and her name was Miss Mayer, Lynette Mayer, and we were going to work night shift together. And of course, the Puma was pretty new, but the Allo was also in a bit of a state of mobilization, was also in a state of needing some updating. So there was another guy, myself, Fossi. He was doing the Allos, and I was doing the Pumas. So she used to stay quite close to me. She used to fetch me in the afternoon, or I would go in my car. She'd leave the car here, and off we go to the base at 3:30 in the afternoon, log on to everything and work until 2 o'clock in the morning, and then drop her off. So 1 week on and sort of 1 week off, then the Allowates had their week on, a week off. And we did this for about 4 or 5 weeks, that I did this with Lynette, every day going in, night shift work. Anyway, must have been about a year later, I had a civvy function, and in fact, I had a flight engineers function. 16 Squadron flight engineers used to have a kitty, and then once every 6 months, we used to use that money to take our wives or girlfriends out for a special cheat tour. And the girlfriend at the time, she was a scuba diving instructor, and I told her, and she said, "Oh, she had forgotten." And I was getting a little bit annoyed with this, because that was always being done over weekends. So Lynette happened to be walking past the Squadron, 16 Squadron crew, and I saw her, and I said to Lynette, "What are you doing tonight?" And first I caught her out. I said, "Are you doing anything tonight?" She said, "No." I said, "Good, I'm picking you up at 7. And she said, "Oh, what's happening?" I said, "No, we've got a flight engineer." Anyway, Julia, of course, I picked her up, and she winked at me twice when I dropped her off, and that was the start of our relationship. And 3 years later, we got married. We got married on the 17th of March, 1990. We had a parade where I think I got my 10 years service medal, and the base OC, Colonel, I can't remember his surname now. When Lynette was standing next to him, handing out the medals, he stopped the procedures. He said, "I know I'm going to break total protocol here, but this lady standing next to me is now engaged to this gentleman that's coming up now to get his medals. So I would like her to put it on my chest." So instead of the officer of the base putting the medal on my chest, she did. And it was quite a special moment for us too. I don't think it's done too often. So we were dropped the bombshell of to say that in the restructuring of the Air Force, that the Air Force Base Port Elizabeth was going to close. That was quite a shock. I mean, it messed both of us up in terms of Lynette and myself. I mean, her parents were now in Port Elizabeth, and she had arranged to be in PE so she could be with her parents. And her dad became a widower, and so of course, so we then started looking around for alternative work. Lynette, not so much. We said, okay, if I can find alternative work, then she wouldn't have to work. That was the biggest problem. Our Air Force training was so good, but it was so specialized that we didn't have universal skills to prepare us for any mechanical type work out there. So, we did fitting and turning, for example. We did tool and TIG making, but we didn't do it for 4 years that you became a specialist. You did it to be able to sort of survive if you needed to work on a lathe, what's the price that we possibly had to work on a lathe. But it was also, giving you the background of how those type of machines worked. So it was very difficult, and it took me about a year. And by the time it was crunch time, where I had to say to the Air Force, I'm either leaving or I need a post. But unfortunately, because I sort of indicated that I would possibly be leaving, all the nice juicy posts around the country had been absorbed. So I had no choice. It was go there or leave it. And it was quite funny because we were way on honeymoon, and Peter asked, my good friend, had a timeshare, and he gave us that timeshare as a honeymoon present. And we had spent a week at the Holiday Inns, and we were back at the timeshare in Sedgefield, just outside Knysna, and it was terrible, shocking weather. And we looked at each other and we thought, what the devil are we doing in this or timeshare, self-catering? We can't try anything, we can't do anything, we can't even enjoy ourselves on the river or the lake. Why don't we just pack up and come home? So that's what we did. We packed everything up, we came home. It was about 10 minutes later after coming home, my telephone rang, and the woman on the other end was from a recruiting agency that said, she's been trying to get hold of me for the last 2 weeks or 10 days or so. And this was the last time she was going to try and call me because she felt that they had a perfect position for me. I said to her, well, I'm quite happy to go for it. I told her I'm honeymoon. She was quite a sort of taken back that we'd come back early. That Friday, it was Wednesday, we came back. That Friday, I went for the interview, and I got the job as a training officer at quite a big company called Welford Oddy in Port Elizabeth. And that was my City Street introduction to City Street. And I still remember the 30th of May was a public holiday in those days, and that was a Thursday. So the 29th of May was a very, very hard, sore day for me because that was my last flip I did as part of flying crew on a Puma, because the 30th I then had to fly out, and the 31st I was finished because it was a public holiday. So so it was a very sad day for me. Adjustment, boy oh boy, it's adjustment that I don't know. You probably being in the force, and you but certainly adjustment of being almost 15 years in the Air Force. We had a special base in Port Elizabeth. I think people will tell you that. If you speak to some of the guys that were from Port Elizabeth, we had a unique base. We knew what we needed to do. We did what we needed to do. I think everyone played their part at Air Force Base, Port Elizabeth, and of course 16 Squadron. The Impalas had left quite a few years before that, and but we had something unique. The compadreship and the environment that we're in was just such a close-knit one. But I think also being flight engineers, you stand together. You just don't get that in Celestial. You're on your own. You've got to make the best of it. There's nobody to go and ask, how can you do this? How can you do that? I recall one day I had a tow rat tail rotor gearbox trains in the veld. And they sent me spares with all the necessary tools that I needed. And I couldn't get this rotor gearbox to fit in properly. And I'll never forget, I phoned one of the flight engineers, Theo Monroe, and he said to me, Mike, you're the biggest idiot you've ever known. Go and look in the cup. They normally put a brand new circlip in this graphite grease. And that's just to make sure that you fill the thing with grease. So when I dug my hand into the cup, there was the new circlip. When I took it out, it went on like a dream. But, yeah, so these are some of the little things that I sort of recall, going along over the years. But as you know, there's so many incidences that we have. A lot of them I've forgotten about, because I ended up now spending 32 years with the company that I was in. This time last year I went on early retirement. Felt that's enough is enough. So in a little bit of a nutshell, I suppose that's my story.
I've really enjoyed this, Mike. I have to tell you, we have something in common here. I was at the Vos Malan. Well, and you of course at Dale College, so you were like the enemy school. We always like to hunt the Dale College boys down, but I must say they were good and very dirty fighters. Yeah. And I don't like the Vos Malan. Let me put this on record too. I'm one of those guys who says I hate it. Going to school, and I still hate that school. I want nothing to do with that school whatsoever. Yeah. But it's a small world, isn't it? King Williamstown, and then East London, and then you got Port Elizabeth that side, who they say is the second most windy city in the world. Because the first windy city in the world has blown away. That's the old joke, but it is a friendly city. It's a fantastic place to live.
Yeah, no, listen, I've been very happy here. I know when I first came to PE, my family weren't very happy. My brother was very much against it because, that year I'd lost my father. So he just felt, that I was running away from possible family chores with my mom. But she understood very well what was happening. And, I must admit, I've never looked back. I really, enjoyed Port Elizabeth. I got into playing lawn bowls, and in that way you meet a lot of people, and you're obviously playing a game which is got a lot of. I mean, it was sort of labelled old man sport, but I used to challenge my late father-in-law in the game, and he used to say, 4 games of bowls over a weekend. I said, I'll top you. Yes, you stiff and sore. Until I played 4 games over a weekend, and I was about 36 or 37, and I could hardly walk, So it is a game that don't underestimate it. And I mean, I encourage some of the guys to try it. I mean, because you do meet lots of people. It was unfortunate that the Air Force Base had a bowls green, but unfortunately, as time went on and funds were getting less and less and less, they had to close that green down. Otherwise, it was run under the army. It was not the Air Force Base, but EP Command. So I just think I've in my life I've had 2 jobs. One in the Air Force, and it was such a pity because you don't know where you would have gone maybe if you had a bit of promotion, because I mean I didn't get to the rank of flight sergeant, and I probably had another 3 or 4 years before I was going to be promoted to then sergeant major, now warrant officer. So my wife, she would have been promoted to sergeant major earlier than me, but then they have to give these non-technical people, the only way they can keep them, they have to jump the early rank, so that they could have some stronghold over us. So we always touch each other, that she was a sergeant major before, would have been a sergeant major before me. And I said, never. So we this year now, just before 17th of March, we celebrated our 32nd wedding anniversary. So that was and that was through Air Force Base Port Elizabeth. I always tease my wife. I said, when we did these mobilization tours in the storeroom, I said, you never ever showed me a bit of the higher part of your leg. or you never winked at me, or you never said, why don't we go for a cup of coffee sometime? Never, ever gave me any inclination that I could have, I would have been her boyfriend or her husband in 3 to 4 years after that.
Well, it was a happy marriage because I know your daughter is now a bit of an opera singer. And I must tell you people, there's a proud father sitting here in front of me. And also a proud bowls player, or lawn, or what do you call it? Because he actually moved the legacy schedule. He said to me, because I'm not recording that day, I'm playing bowls, man. And so we had to prove it. And then when we got to this one, he says to me, man, I'm not doing it that afternoon either because my daughter is going to sing for us. And so we had to make it earlier. But we don't mind. We don't mind.
Every time when she came on stage, I think it still happens, but I'm getting a bit more used to it. But every time she came onto the stage, I used to get tears in my eyes because I just cannot. I just couldn't believe that was my daughter singing some of that stuff. She's done well. But she puts a lot of time in it. She did a lot of work to it. Her master's degree, she put a huge amount of effort in, and it's reaped the water, And although she's teaching in a high school, she could walk into any university, virtually globally. She did spend 6 months as an exchange student in California at a Monterey Bay University, which is about 2 hours south of San Francisco. So she did a lot of the sightseeing of the West Coast, of the States. Even went down to Los Angeles and all those type of places, LA. So so she's done a bit of seeing of America, and although this is not to, the Americans, I don't think have got that sort of music history where the Europeans are very entrenched in music history, But I reckon she could move into any position. I sort of recall somewhere along the line that with her master's degree, there was a German company that was university that was very interested for her to come across and deliver a paper on her master's, but unfortunately COVID messed that all around her. But my other daughter, and I suppose you better not, but you can put it on, it's what they call high maintenance. And we'll leave it as that. So I've got 2 very different daughters.
Well, it's nice to me, because often when I speak to military people, I find a good, solid marriage behind it. And there's a lot of family love there as well. And it seems to me that there's something of a pattern, and I really enjoy that. Which makes me think back that your mate who wanted to be the pilot, did he succeed? The one who joined with you?
No, Gordon Adlard. Actually, when he didn't make pilot's course, but he made a navigator's course. And then we lost contact, and the navigators, they go and do their courses down in Cape Town. And I think they spent quite a lot of time in Longyearbyen, because I think they start off on decks and they work on Shackletons a bit, and then they get branch out to aircraft that carry navigators, which a lot of them was 28 Squadron. So that's when we met up again. Was actually at 28 Squadron. So we'd lost a bit of time where we, and he eventually left the Air Force, and then he actually was selected to do pilot's course, and then he didn't make it. He then rejoined the Air Force after he left, got some time, and I know he became a commandant, got in charge of a lot of the Air Force bases, navigation equipment. I know he left and worked for the Red Cross, I think it was, or NATO. His base is in Minolta, but he seems to travel quite a lot. So he's now a citizen of the country of Minolta. It just sort of said NATO, and I happened to go up to Southwest when Untag was there. Yes, and that was quite an experience working with some of those guys, and just their whole approach to things was very funny. I mean, they were very initially they were very scared to be there. They didn't know what was happening, and of course, they had the bells there, and of course, a lot of those pilots there were non commissioned officers. So of course they didn't know where to go and eat. Now they're eating. The pilots are eating with us in the non-commissioned officers, the office, and then some of them went to go and eat with the South African pilots, and then now a pilot is a pilot is he allowed in the so it was quite fascinating. The flying wing was the Italians, and they actually gave me a pocket knife, a Swiss pocket knife, which I've still got today, and it holds a very good memory of flying with them, up in there in the last couple of months. I mean, we would fly a lot to the joint missionary command post which they'd set up. So we would fly, and of course there we had an opportunity to meet up with some of the Cuban pilots, some of the Angolan pilots, one or two East German pilots, and they would fly the MA8s in there. And I recall one day we were there, and these guys would just reverse. So they would just get to an LZ, and they had mirrors on the side of the MI8, and they just reversed, and that guy hit the tree with his tail rotor. And they came and asked us, "Can we have a look at the aircraft? Do you think we can carry on flying this aircraft?" Well, we've been comrades in the industry. We said, "No, Nelly, you cannot fly that. No, you've got to get space." Someone said, "Well, you should have let them go," because they wouldn't have made their destination. But now all of a sudden, we weren't that bad enemies after all. But it was also quite interesting to see some of those aircraft close up, because we didn't have the opportunities to see them close up. We couldn't get to look at the engines; they were all bolted closed. So they could only see the engine oil levels and maybe replenish engine oil. But that was about it, certainly on the MI8. That incident where the medic got left behind, we didn't see them at all, but apparently the Inter told us that we were about 15 minutes behind some of the MiG-24s, the Hind helicopters. They had been tasked to come and take us up, but unfortunately, the heat in Southwest also with that heavy aircraft didn't allow them to carry a lot of fuel. So a lot of times they couldn't venture too far away from their base because of the fact that they couldn't carry a huge payload of fuel. So that was in our advantage. A lot of times that we used to get chased by them, but they couldn't catch us. Although the Hind 24 was faster than a Puma, they didn't have the range. So once we ducked out of their way and we got that gap, we could then outfly them, just purely on range. We obviously there was one or two incidences that we had up in Angola, where particularly on Allows, where we came across one or two landing strips that had aircraft on them, and I was very tempted to get that pilot to land. And I don't know whether I would have taken them off, but seeing I had done about 35 hours on fixed wings, I felt I could have had the capability of maybe taking one of them off and stealing it and bringing it back to Ndangwa base. I know there was a couple of stories that there were a couple of helicopters that some of the flight engineers did actually fly out. Because look, they did let us fly, particularly Allows, you did. It was part of the special operations that the engineers would be able to fly the aircraft more sort of straight and level, but just maybe a possibility having something to that you can land. I mean, if your pilot does get injured, or your pilot does get sick on board or something like it, and you had dual controls, I felt some of us had enough. We're flying along enough to be able to have that experience. I obviously had the experience of flying the Puma, which was quite different, and very, very controlled, semi-automatic, autopilot, very, very sensitive. Those aircraft are extremely sensitive, So we as non-pilots, you don't really understand how sensitive those aircraft actually are when you get beyond the controls with all the hydraulic systems that they have. But I think we were in a town called Pumas, very high north of almost, I think, in a straight line with the Mjuba. And I think it was a prison, and I think the Mirages had come in and bombed the place. But I tell you what, it had no effect on us how well that prison was built. We walked around in that later on when it was declared safer. I wouldn't have liked to be locked up there.
Yeah, I understand the Puma is quite a quick helicopter. It can really motor. It's fast.
Yeah, I think it's the average speed for that size of aircraft. I don't think you get, unfortunately, helicopters. They have designed helicopters that can go a lot faster than that, but then they're pretty streamlined. They've got their blades are different. Your blades are obviously the aspect ratio, which is the length versus the width of your blade, plays a very important role, in what you can carry. I mean, if you look at your little Jalbert Ranger that's got 2 blades, or your Robinson's got 2 blades, where, the Pumas and Allos have got 4 blades. The little T-trolley, the Wasps that used to work with the Navy in Simonstown, that had a negative pitch. So the pilot can put the collector to a negative pitch, which allowed you to be sucked onto the platform of the boat. So instead of having 0 pitch where you have odd vulnerability, you could have a negative. But I think in general, your helicopters are probably getting, I suppose, with the new generation aircraft, probably 160 kilos knots an hour. Which when you come to your average fixed wing, obviously, your bigger fixed wing, they're much faster than that. I always used to, when I was on Pumas, I always used to tease the Allos and saying they're the only aircraft in the Air Force that will have a bird strike from behind it. They're so slow. I think the Allo flies at 85 knots, But I suppose you multiply that almost by 2 will give you the kilos, per hour. So, 160 knots is kilos an hour. It's not too shabby. We've done some where we've had, you talked about PE having heavy wind. I mean, we've done in a Puma where we had quite a good westerly wind, and we took off from here at the same time as a Boeing, SAA Boeing. I don't know if you know how to say SAA anymore, but we took off here from PE and to East London, and we were probably doing a ground speed of about 200 knots. We actually beat the Boeing. I mean, and it was fantastic. I mean, we were out the aircraft and everything, and next minute the Boeing came in, and the pilot wasn't very happy with us. But we had an indicated speed of like 120, 130 knots, but we had this ground speed of like 210 or 220 knots. Doing the reciprocal journey home, we had to land in the middle of nowhere and get fuel driven out to us, because we landed. There we were doing indicated 130 knots and sort of 60 knots ground speed. So but
I suppose the views are quite beautiful for you, as able to look, forward and by the sides.
The Allo almost gives you a fisheye view, which is sort of that 180, maybe 270 degree turn if you're facing straight, because of the bubble canopy on it. It is restricted on a Puma very much, especially for the flight engineer, because you are sitting behind the flight deck, you are sitting behind the instrumentation. You've got the 2 left and right hand sides below the pilot's seat. Vertically left and right, you can't see because you've got the bulkheads behind you. So you would have to lean quite forward, and then you would only have a visual of far distance. You wouldn't be able to view because the co-pilot, the pilot are in the way. But if we needed to get visual of the ground, we would always go and open the doors or whatever the case may be, or go to the back, which we did quite often. especially if we were doing confined landings and things like that, where we had to batter the pilots down into those things. Then we would open both doors and we would then be monitoring, and looking at the, pilots getting into tight LZs. We were their eyes, and, basically, I was speaking now to one of the pilots. We had an Air Force base reunion on the 19th of February, where we had over 65 old Air Force base members, and a lot of them were from 16th Squadron. We had a lot of pilots, and one of the pilots, he's just retired, and his name was Sonny Yannicka, and he was, was in the Air Force for many years, and he was saying the first time he flew a quite a sizable chopper without a flight engineer, he was scared, because he had nobody to tell him where his landing gear was, where his tail rotor was. He had to then basically almost learn from scratch how to land this aircraft on his own, because he was always had a flight engineer to assist him. And it said, when he said that, it just shows you that while we were there, I don't think we had the appreciation of it. But when you listen to something like that, then it makes you, it says to you, yes, you had a role, you had a function. I remember one of the pilots, he got his civilian license, and he was flying for John Ralph over the Christmas time in Port Elizabeth, the John Ralph sponsored aircraft, and he landed at the city side of the airport, and he would walk into hangar and say, "Go and refuel my aircraft." They looked at him and was stupid. He says, "Who's the pilot here?" "No, I am." He said, "Well, that's what you get paid for. You refuel the aircraft. I don't refuel the aircraft." And those aircraft, what we had to do, if you operate aircraft over the water, you have to do what we call a compressor wash, because we have a salt buildup in the veins of mainly in the compressor, obviously, and that could it crystallizes into salt crystals, and that causes them to slow down. So it could have an engine failure. So that's why you'll find chopper operations don't spend a noodle amount of time over the sea, before they get relieved. But then we have to go back, and there's a special system, and we've got to wash those with the salt deactivating type liquid. And of course, these aircraft needed that because he was flying up. He had to go and do it, And then he said, we were actually at the NSRI, and he made mention. He said, "You know what? My whole viewpoint for flight engineers has changed," because he said, the South African Air Force aircraft are not expendable, but flight engineers are. And he built up quite a hatred for saying that. But I think after that he apologized, and then actually realized what role we actually did play in the maintaining and the servicing and of the ground part of the operation, as well as the flying part of the operation. I think it was comfortable to know that you got another set of eyes, particularly in a chopper, because it's designed to fly low level. And we have lots of issues that low level flying, gives us, telephone wires, high tension wires. I mean, we have a lot of, in certain areas, you have a lot of these high helium balls, that they use as aerials. And, you don't see them from a distance. You just don't see them, especially wires, they put these big orange balls in the Transvaal area or the old Vaal area. They used to put these big orange balls on those high tension wires, purely just to give visual of for choppers operating in the area. Dangerous stuff. Those things are dangerous. It's not so much the actual wires, but there's a ground wire that they run on the top of the high tension wires that you don't see until the last minute. Both. I mean, I think our South African Air Force and our technical departments, we were very innovative of introducing a lot of modifications on, being a French aircraft, aircraft. We did a lot of mods where we introduced what we call a wire cutter on an Alouette. It's got a little, looks like an aerial, but it's actually a V-shaped aerial. It's got a sort of shape of a V, and that's just there to hopefully, cut wires. In the Puma, for example, if you look at the front grid of the Puma, you'll see you've got two white controls and two red ones. Now, the red ones are your emergency fuel shut-off cocks, and they're forward. Apparently, a crew was flying and they hit a bird right on those two controls and shut the engines down. So what happened was they had to do emergency landing, and what happened was we came across and we put a little grid in front of those controls, a little, looks like a brow grid, in front of those controls, so that if you do have something hit there, it's not going to come through and knock those emergency shutoff cocks off. So, it might sound a stupid thing, but it's so important, and it's so, it can play such a critical role. And I mean, those were just some of the minor things that I think we contributed, from the technical point of view, and not only just, flight engineers, because a lot of flight engineers became technical officers like Stephen, and a lot of flight engineers did what they, they became the technical flight engineers, and they actually did pilot's course as well. So they weren't only just technical flight, and I think that's what Stephen was hoping to get to. At some point in his life, he wanted to become one of those test flight engineers where you can actually fly the aircraft yourself. You go on training, go through the Air Force training, and but you still stay as a technical person. You're not there to do your operational squadron work. It's purely on test flight. And there were a lot of things that I think we did that I think we can, now those aircraft are non-existent, unfortunately. I think we can hold our head up high, on some of the things that we did on those aircraft.
You encouraged to think like that, out of a box thinking by the Air Force?
I'd say yes or no. I think I think once you can get into a little bit of a rut, because why should I do it when there's three other guys that can do it? I think you had guys that that their rank went to their head a bit, and they well, I don't have to do that anymore. Other guys can do it. I myself, I don't think I was one of those flight engineers or person in the maintenance side that passed the buck. I myself would rather do it myself, because then I know that it was done. I didn't want to go and do a servicing and know that they'd done the servicing for me, and I'm just going to pull the aircraft out and fly. I would rather do it myself and then pull the aircraft out. So yes, we were. I mean, I think as we started getting more senior, and you started becoming, I became sort of more of a senior flight sergeant. I think there were more roles that we were playing, and they were more sort of the technical roles, the admin maybe roles that we were playing. And also, if you, obviously we were like senior flight engineers, and we could do conversions to new flight engineers, like sea rescue conversions, et cetera, et cetera. We weren't a Bloomspruit where they did the flight engineers conversions. But I think at the end of the day, when you had new flight engineers coming in, and bearing in mind, unfortunately, I wasn't there. The new flight engineers that came into the Air Force after 1990, they never got bush experience, so they never got long hours of flying. We were fortunate; we did a lot of flying. I mean, at times I couldn't fly because I'd flown my quota for the 2 weeks flying. Particularly on Pumas. Sorry, you can't fly for 2 days, and that was just those are the stringent controls that we had to have because of things like fatigue, etc., etc. And I think the young engineers that are coming into the Air Force certainly now, I mean, it will take them years and years and years to accumulate hours, to, let's say, a flight engineer on alloys for 4 years, in the 80s. I mean, he flew, probably got to 2,000 hours in 4 or 5 years, where nowadays it will be unheard of flight engineers. So I think we had to think out the box. I think we had the opportunities to think out the box. I also had a bit of a flight incident. Stephen mentioned it, and I was lucky. I went on a course to SAA where we did a course on cockpit management, where we tried to, recognize everybody's role in the cockpit. We're a team, goalkeepers are not there to score goals. They're there to prevent goals going in. if he is scoring goals, he's out of his domain. He must stay in his area of expertise. And I think that was coming. It was a Canadian company that presented the course, but it was absolutely a fantastic course. You wish it could go on forever because that's how structured it was. And I think that also opened up the eyes to a lot of us, particularly some of the younger pilots, that were giving command, and they were now, having responsibility of commanding a crew, like a command of a Puma or a Freelon or something like that, where it's more than one person or two people operating the aircraft. But yeah, I think you had to, particularly flying wise, I think you had to think in the box. There were cases that I mentioned earlier on that we put up about a 200-meter tower at Zastron, and it was a 3-legged triangle, and they had the whole tower on a rugby field down below, and they built the frame or the foundations, and the base was quite easy to put on because you could see, and the pilots had visuals of the land, so they could see in their hover. They had a viewpoint where they could, visual point where they could fix on and pick up with the movement. But as we built this tower higher and higher, so the pilots lost visual of the ground underneath them. So their visual was in the valley. And what happened, we were turfing these parts onto the turfers, and we'd had go through the mounting lugs on the legs of these things. We married them together so that when we came in, they would just lower them. And this one particular section, they actually got it wrong. So we couldn't get this thing to line up. And as I looked up, I saw the rotor ribs bleeding off on our ribs, and I shouted to the pilot, rotor ribs, like below 240, rotor ribs. And he was saying, I'm pulling power. Eventually we had to jettison it. Now it was how to get this thing back on it. It was now another kettle of fish to now remove this thing, reposition the cable, and then put it back on. So we had to use a lot of thinking there, and we got it. We did it. I mean, myself and the pilot said, well, why don't we, try and get a cable through the center, because of the weight had landed in the center of this triangle. So we tied it on. We then took right out the top of it, climbed up and took it out. And then we came next to them that gave me the cable, and I had to put in about 60-foot of rope to get to the cable that we could then hook it onto the undercarriage of the Puma, and then we lifted the piece off, and then managed to get it on properly. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times where I think you have to, and I'm not saying this where I'm trying to be clever, but I think you have to also just notice what sort of weight that you are on some of the aircraft, and be cognizant, just to remind pilots, that, we are heavy, we have got the amount of fuel, have you done the right checks to make sure that we can land in certain areas, because helicopter can be unforgiving. If you land down in the valley and you pack it full of kit, and then you try and land on top of the mountain, you won't have enough power to land because you're too heavy. And I think those type of things that you've got to make sure. I don't think it's rethinking, but it's just reminding the crews that I'm also young. I don't fly the airplane, but I'm also young. You must fly properly.
I think that's a fantastic system. I mean, it's something which I admire. The ability between the air crews to talk to each other, right, or a flight crew. It's to me fantastic. But I have a question to you, two of them actually. I've heard there was a traffic light at one of the pops at one of the Air Force bases in the operational area. Is that true?
Yes, there was.
May I ask you how that traffic light got to that area?
I must be quite honest. I can honestly say I don't know how it got there, but it was connected to the pub. And when the green light was on, the pub was open. When the orange light was on, it was last round, and when the red light was on, the bar was closed. So it was quite weird. How it got there, who knows? yeah, no, but it served its purpose.
Yeah,
I suppose
but I've seen pictures of this particular traffic light. It must have been there from the 70s. It wasn't a new design. It looked a bit older.
oh yeah. It might have probably come from either South Windhoek maybe, or it might have come from Recruitment. I can't see it coming from any of the towns close by. They wouldn't have had that. No, they wouldn't have had that type of. They didn't need it. I mean, you whispered through those times so quickly. Yeah, I mean, I've had some funny incidences where your wheels on an elevator are quite important, and if they're not pumped properly, you get what we call ground resonance. The aircraft bounces, and it can get quite dangerous. So you need to make sure that the wheels are pumped at a consistent pressure all the time. So we needed to pump our wheels, and we landed at a local garage, and pushed the aircraft in. So you can imagine landing in the middle of a town, not up north obviously, but landing these two aircraft in the middle of town, pushing them into a garage, and then pumping the wheels. And I had a friend of mine was a flight engineer, and he spoke to the pilot, and we got a whole lot of guys, and we started the aircraft up, but we didn't engage the Ella, and we asked them to push start it in this town, and they pushed this Ella about 130 meters. They were messed. They were like, he said, "But you're useless. You can't push start this thing. We need proper men to push start this Ella." So yeah. There's probably, you sit and I just think of, a lot of things come back to you, but I mean, I also think it would have been such a good idea if, and I say that to any young person, doesn't matter what career they're in or where they are, try and write a monthly memo, even a weekly memo or a monthly memo of what you did for that week, and just jot it down, because, names become far and few between, you forget those names, and particularly, when you're flying up in Southwest, you forget a lot of the towns that you went to, because they're not names that you use often. And especially like myself now, that's been out of the force for over 32 years, you see faces, but yes, you just can't put that name to it. And of course, they've aged about 30 years too.
I have a question for you, Mike. I've been speaking to Special Forces people, and they would be out in the bush for quite a while, and then they would come back. And some of them would admit that they were actually quite smelly. And when they get into that helicopters, would you people notice them from the smell?
Let me put it this way. They might have gotten smelly, but that's why we used to fly with the doors open. And we would be in the front of the aircraft, so the wind would blow backwards. So we wouldn't get that smell. I know the C-130 guys, they used to battle with the smell, once they got to a bit of an altitude, and then they would, and I know for one, when I did a little bit of C-130, load mastering, we had a very, very rowdy group, and that you could smell them, and we then put the air conditioner on very hot. Yes, and these guys would start stripping and they'd go, "Please, can't you get the pilot to turn it down?" Well, guys, stop your nonsense in the aircraft, sit down, we'll turn it down. Then we'll turn it down to normal ambient room temperature, sort of 20, 22 degrees. Then they'd stop their nonsense again. Then we'd turn it down, and we'd go down to about, once or twice, we went down to about -1, -2. Then you see those guys trying to scramble for clothes to put them on. But it wasn't, I think we all got accustomed to the bush smell. Many a time we did night stops with them, especially in Angola, where we were on close reaction force time. Remember sitting in Angola, and we dug holes in the ground, to put our mattresses in, and that was standard operation. So we would dig our mattresses in, and you dig it about 3 feet deep, 4 feet deep, depending how big you are. And this one friend of mine, he had dug his mattress in, and he was just in the shade, and he was sleeping, and next minute the one guy kicks his foot, and he's standing there with the Mokarev, 9mm Mokarev. And as he woke up, he looked at this guy in the face, and he thought, he's been captured. Meantime, this guy was trying to see if he can't buy, when they're going back to the base, if he can't get some booze and cards for us, because, as Air Force guys, we spoilt ourselves. We would bring our own rations and then fly to the closest base, or, so, and especially if we knew that that base had a limited stock reserve. The robots were always red, so we bring our own, that type of thing, and so yeah, these guys knew. I used to feel quite sorry for the guys in the felt, especially the UNITA guys, because their cards, you could hardly see the pattern on the cards anymore. And in those days we used to get our donkey tani sakis, and it was used to be a pack of cards. So I used to wait until we go up into the veld, and then I would go back and I'd say, right, who's the youngest at your group, or who's been married, or who's got the youngest child, and I'd give that person, that soldier, a pack of my cards. He was a hero. He was a hero. He had this brand new pack of cards. I always used to give my cards to them.
Many of the soldiers here were telling me about that the Air Force would arrive and they would give them some goodies. Especially the 3-2 battalion guys were talking about that. Who would decide on this, to put in a case of beers or something, something behind, not the normal ammunition, water, the usual?
Yeah, no, that happened. I mean, what would happen is we would go to, like, for example, Air Force Base Tamdangwa, and then we would be shipped out to various different army bases, in Nana, Umbalantu, even Rukana, well, not so much Runu because they had their own aircraft, but we'd go out to various different bases, and we would stay there for reaction force time. And then we used to take a lot of the force, the Pumas used to come in, and if there was a lot of guys, they used to then put the guys into the veld. So you used to know the guys, and then we would often go in and have to do top cover, and then, like, for example, I know a particular 3-2 battalion guy. He was also, funny enough, to deal with me, and then we met up long after that. And I think you had him on one of your interviews, Rick Lobb, and I remember seeing him come in the aircraft, and I'd put in a 6-pack of beer, or you go to the mess and you try and get a piece of steak from the mess, or a chop, or loaf of bread for the guys, just something different, or we would have, in the hangars and that, we'd have all the broken rack packs, that had fallen off trucks and had broken. So a lot of the guys used to, come and raid those rack packs. So you used to go and get the nice things out of the rack packs, keep them in your aircraft, and if you do happen to land next to some of the guys, you throw those extra little tidbits of the rack packs that you collected. I always used to do that quite often, Unfortunately, we didn't run allies. You don't have much contact with the guys on the ground as much as you do have contact with the guys, obviously, on Pumas.
I've asked Steve Kutsia about your escape and evasion exercises. He was apparently abused by a Zulu guy, and I do plan to get all of the flight engineers and perhaps a pilot or two together to tell me about this training cycle, because no one ever talks about it. But it makes sense to me that you should be able to survive and to be on the run if your aircraft go down. So I know that the Air Force would have spent a lot of, I suppose, time and effort to train you guys. Do you have a few stories on what happened at these exercises?
Yeah, we used to go up in the Palabola area, and then we did a ground school course where they used to teach us a lot about the flora and fauna, the foliage, what to look for. It was quite intense. I mean, they had some very, very experienced people, talking to us. I mean, very experienced civilian people talk to us and, sort of game rangers of the area, and they would teach us, the habit of certain animals. The hyena is a scavenger, and they teach us what we must do, to prevent ourselves being trumped by a hyena. In fact, we had one of the pilots, he made his little bivvy and he got bitten by a hyena, which was quite funny. It wasn't funny at the time, but after that we giggled. I'm sure you've heard the story. We would then break up. When we did the practical, we would then break up into teams. And that was, I think we were all flying crews. So we had pilots and flight engineers mixed. And they would give us stuff to record and remember, and each one had a different sheet of paper to remember. And they had the recce's after us, and of course they had the black recce's after us, and doing tracking. We would try anti-tracking, and of course that area up at Luceri Game Reserve, it's hot as can be, and so we would move mainly in mid-afternoon and at night, and of course you had to get like the guys in the bush, you had to count your steps to more or less try to map yourself on the map. We had a fairly good map, but we never really were ground force that were actually shown a lot of. We had these really 1 in 1 million type map, or 1 in 250,000 map, ratio map. It shows us out what we need to see, not what the ground forces see. And so I record one day we decided, our little group, we decided we're going to walk to get to our rendezvous point. It was about 25 clicks, and we had to do this in about 6 days. I think we decided we're going to walk about 3.5 to 4 kilos south of where we were dropped off. We then walked eastwards, and the idea was we were going to walk about another 4 or 5 k's eastwards, and then we'll start going up north. And we wanted to go past the rendezvous point and come in, go west and then come in from the south. And we actually managed that quite well. A lot of guys got caught early, and there were a lot of guys that got hurt, in the interrogation phase. I've got my doubts whether I think it needs to be done or not. I think there's a limit to it. I mean, you don't go pushing old men down hills and breaking ribs and stuff like that. Some of the guys took strain, in the interrogation that take place, especially the guys that were caught quite early. We probably got caught about 300 meters coming into the rendezvous point, so we nearly made it. But fortunately, we didn't. They didn't have enough time to give us the interrogation that the other guys got. But some of the guys, got caught within 4 hours. But what used to hurt me, it used to be our own flight engineers flying, trying to catch us, our own teams. Obviously the food we had to sort for ourselves, and I think we had fair enough knowledge to be able to apply the skills that we had been taught to eat the types of roots and leaves and etc. etc. I record one early morning, we set sail, we planned to walk around about sort of 10 o'clock. Well, that's how I estimate the time. We tried to work out the time. We got pretty accurate towards the end, because we had no watches. And we then were walking on this particular trail, which we found, and we were quite spread out. We were probably about 60 meters between us, like 6 of us. And the back guy was always the guy the front guy was always the guy that counted. And when he got to 2,000, he would stop and we'd all swap around and off we'd go again. And the next minute, this guy shouted, "Snake!" And there was this snake in our pathway. Well, the guy's like bombshell. When we realized food, well, I tell you what, within about 20 minutes, that poor snake was skinned, his mouth head, and he was on a little smokeless fire. And that was my first taste of snake. And I must say, it didn't go down too badly. I also did the sea rescue. course as well. Yeah, that was also very tough. Again, we went to Kirstenbosch down in Cape Town. We spent a week there doing a ground school where they would take us through the gardens of Kirstenbosch and show us all the plants that are coastal plants that we can eat, you know, and how to make water, convert salt water into fresh water, and how to basically try and survive, you know, in the sea. How to keep yourself covered. What you need to do, you know, try and catch fish. Obviously, you know, try and eat the protein parts of the fish for electrolytes. You know, so you don't eat the flesh. You eat the offal of the fish, because that's where you're going to get all your protein from. And yeah, very, very interesting. Then you start the seaside section where we go off to Longyearbyen. We got on a strike craft. It was June, by the way, and wake us up at 5 a.m. and tell us to jump on the strike craft. Fortunately, they had quite high seas, so we were lucky we didn't have to go out to sea, but we did it in the bay, Longyearbyen Bay. But it didn't make any difference. I don't think you know, outside in the high sea or in the Longyearbyen Bay, maybe. And then they make us tread water for about an hour and a half. You do all your body-saving devices that they taught you. They almost bring us to a point of hypothermia, you know, where they then put us into, you know, we've got to identify people, you know, from who's showing real signs of hypothermia and who's not showing signs, and who's still, you know, is still a little bit cognitive. They know what's going on. And then they would put us into one-man dinghies. We'd have to pop them, get them blow up the canopy. Try and get into them is a trick of note. I think if you're anything over 80 kilos, you battled like hell. I think if you're anything over sort of 5'10", you battled like hell. So I was neither of the two at the time, so I slipped into mine quite well. And then it's stay dry. You can't stay dry. I mean, the canopy just creates condensation. That just creates water, which then runs down the side of this one-man dinghy and onto your backside. And I tell you what, it is flipping ice cold. You can't actually keep your bum numb, because the sea, you just got a little pocket of air between you and the sea. So of course it gets cold. So you can imagine you're like a wiggle worm in this little one-man dinghy. As I say, I think it's made for our little gnomes that run around everywhere, because they're certainly not made for the average human. Yeah, we had to spend a night on there. They did come around with flying jackets that they gave us to try and keep a little bit warm. But it's impossible to stay warm. You know, what you've eventually got to do, you almost got to take your overall off in the water, then jump back into your dinghy, and then see if you can drive from there, or get your overall over the top of the canopy and see if you can get your overall drive from there. But I mean, to get it back on is another trick. But all in all, you know, we then spent, I think it was 2 days on this one-man dinghy. Then we all had to jump back into the water, do all our body-saving exercises again, and then we were climbing to a 10-man dinghy. Inflate that. Sure. Now, I think it's designed for the hobbits, you know, because it's designed for people that are 4 foot and have got size 2 shoe. Because you sit around the perimeter with your back facing the perimeter. It's like a big sort of blow-up swimming pool with your feet facing inwards. Now, of course, we've all got, you know, safety boots on, and running shoes or whatever. I think it was more running shoes. But boy, oh boy, there is no space. There is just, for 10 people in that thing, I don't know. I really don't know how we would survive in that thing. I challenge it. But we did. We took turns of sitting on the outside. We had to spend a night on that. So we all got a number and we all went to rotation. So number one spent an hour outside, hanging on the outside of this big tube. It had a canopy, obviously, just to give us space inside. You know, and then we had to beach this thing. So we had to now have half the people inside, half the people outside. Yeah, what a joke! That was quite hilarious. I mean, to try and beach that 10-man dinghy was, yeah, it was funny. But it was a roughish sea. But I mean, yeah, we eventually get it. But no one stayed in the dinghy. We all fell out. The taller guys then have the advantage because then they can push from behind, and us little guys, we have to pull from the front to get that thing. We found once we got on dry land, of course the rations were rather minimal. We found a cattle farm, and on the cattle farm they had an old cistern like a toilet. And when we knew that water was going to be fresh, so we filled up a lot of bottles we found along the coast, and we trooped off a couple of k's down the road to this farm, and we filled up all these bottles with fresh water. One of the guys came across a seal. He had been badly injured. He must have been hit by a propeller or something. He had been washed up. He wasn't quite dead yet. So we actually got the instructors to come and shoot it for us because it was suffering. And then we had a guy that blood and everything didn't bother him. So he started preparing some seal steaks for us. So that night we cooked some seal steaks, very, very thick with oil. We found a little zinc plate, and we cleaned it as best as we can with some sand, etc. And we just put that on the fire, and we just put those steaks on there, or that meat, let me rather call it, on that zinc, on the grit. And we just had to char cook it because it was very, very, obviously it tastes very, very fishy. But the meat is very red. It was actually surprising how red the meat is. But yeah, then we had the decks came in and they did their Lindholm drop, and that was gee whiz because they gave you a bit of food and water, and in it was a beer because we basically finished. And then I tell you, after all of us drank one beer, none of us were talking English or Afrikaans. It was all a modern Chinese. Yeah. And then you go for lunch. After that, you go and shower up and you go for lunch, and it's just amazing how your stomachs have shrunk, and your intake of food is just you haven't got that appetite, even though you think you're going to eat all. I remember also being at Palabora, we were a couple of guys, and there were a couple of guys doing the same survival course, but they were given rat packs. They were given different types of food, and we would fly in with two doctors. They would take blood samples of the groups. I think there were 6 groups of 5 people that were on different types of rations, and some were on normal foods that we had to go and give them. And then every 6 hours we would take blood samples, and we would fly that into Palabora Hospital so that they could, all the nutritionists could look at and see how they would, what they needed in the rat packs, what we needed. And I think from there they did quite a lot of development on the types of food and rat packs that you got, because towards the end, I mean, those dehydrated food packs that you boil them and then you put water in. I mean, those chicken and steaks are amazing. I mean, you can't believe they're so thin, and and then you put a bit of water in, you boil it in the plastic, and then and what it tastes like. I mean, the calorie count was massive. It was sort of almost 3,000 calories, and that's what the guys needed. They didn't need huge volume of food. It would take to be a high calorie protein type food. So yeah, I think, I mean, even now I look at certain trees. I think I've also got a bit of an advantage coming from King Williamstown, because we used to go out into the bush and we used to socialize with the Marquetas out there, and they would teach us the different healing plants that they used to use. And so of course, being up in the bush, you didn't quite see that type of same plant, but I could identify some of the plants that had healing powers, on the back of the plants, that would give you more healing power and more nourishment. But I think, as I say, in being in training for over 30 or 25 years, in City Street, if you want to call it, there's no chalk and cheese. City Street, there's no comparison. I don't, people aren't trained; they just show. They expected to know something. Limited training, limited. I think that's why our industry does have a lot of accidents. They don't really know what's going on. They're not taught. They don't want to teach them a lot of things, because they want to limit to their knowledge that they don't get paid for what they know. They get paid for what they can do. And yet, when I think of some of the courses that I've been on, just the rust prevention courses that we went on, corrosion courses. Fantastic, brilliant top course. Time wasn't of the essence. It was you to get the knowledge. And I went on a work study course, which I applied that in the Air Force, in service street. That was like a 2-week course that we did, a work study course. Very technical, very, I found it, quite difficult, but once you got the grasp of it, it was extremely good. The management courses that we've gone on for promotion courses were part of the course, that really did give you the foundations of, getting rank and using it correctly and not abusing it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that both Steve and Laurens both of them are overseas. Both of them said to me that the initial training in the Air Force was so good that when they look at the different people they're working with now, they say they can absolutely see the difference, and they were not that impressed.
Well, I think this is one problem. For companies to spend that money, I just think we don't spend enough on our school training. There is no link between the school preparation and your after-school career. Obviously, if you go and do a degree, that does give you a little bit of a bridging course. But certainly, if you go and do even apprentice courses, even becoming an apprentice, I just think and leaving school, not maybe having the academics to maybe go and do an apprenticeship. But yeah, apprenticeships do take some of the more practical orientated people than the cognitive people that can do cognitive learning. But and I think this is one of the reasons why we have places like China, with respect that they train their people well and they can produce things that we can't produce at that quality. Okay, half the Chinese quality is my crap, but our quality in certainly in South Africa in terms of artisanship is falling way behind Paul. And I think now a lot of guys are looking at this and saying, I'd rather go and if I can go and do a degree, if I can do studying afterwards, it's going to be better for me. And I think this is where the problem is. We don't have enough technical people, and I think Australia have landed in that sort of situation that they're now having to import a lot of technical skills, because they didn't worry about it. It was easy to get the stuff from China and India, Singapore, Malaysia. It was just they could almost shoot it down south, put it on a slow ship down south, and they could then land all those things. Now I think Australia is now sorry that they haven't got that type of skill. So they are getting a bit of the older guys in, because they know those older guys, have got more of the skill that they need, and hoping those guys can mentor the younger guys coming in. But I look at some of the mentors and I see what type of training they're giving some of the people. It's bad. It's really bad. Look at our motor car environment in the world. We can't connect a single car in this whole world nowadays without a computer. So what have we taken away? The work package from people. We've taken a lot of work away. And that's everything just about what. I've got a dishwasher that's packing up. They put it onto the computer to see whether the PC board is operating or not. And in the old days, they probably didn't have a PC board. It just had a simple program that was programmable by the average person. But now everything we buy today, you can't fix it yourself. You've got to take it to the specialist. And those people are, being in the training world in service today, and I've got a little bit of a different opinion to the qualifications that Stephen mentioned, and being involved with a lot of those people. Artisans that obtain the N6, they become technicians. Okay, you can get an N6 National Engineering Diploma, but you're regarded in the industry as a technician. Those guys that go to the old Technicon that we used to know it, and they get an engineering diploma. They don't get a degree. They get an engineering diploma. They do, and they've got to do hands-on practical as well as the theoretical. And unfortunately, the varsities have combined the technicals of the universities together, but you still get that practical, diploma. You'll get a national diploma. They can then go on and do their BTech degree, but it's still it's regarded as those guys are regarded as technologists. So I'm looking for an engineering technologist. An engineer is someone that has gone to varsity and has got a proper degree in his engineering. And I think that is the right approach. And I think an engineer needs to protect his profession. He's worked hard, he needs to protect his profession. So a lot of people, because they've got this diploma that says engineering diploma, they think they're engineers. And there's a vast difference. A doctor, a nurse cannot call themselves a nurse if they've been nursing for 25 years or 30 years. If you've got a highly trained theatre sister, you'll probably find half of those theatre sisters do 90% of the operation anyway, but they can't call themselves a doctor. The doctor that qualified a year ago is a doctor. He can do that operation. He's a doctor. He's qualified to do it. And I think we've got to respect the different types of professions that people have. And I think we tend to overinflate our qualifications a bit. And I think that's also been a downfall, because you then can't perform to the level of what you're telling your future employee what you are. He's going to expect an engineer. He's going to expect you to do the work of an engineer, but meantime you are a technician. You can do the work. Give me the information that I need to do, and I can do the work for you. And your technologist is also hands-on to a certain extent, but he's also there to help with some of the planning stages of the work that needs to be done. So I think we get it a bit wrong, and I think that I blame our education department. They're all democrat as far as I'm concerned. They've introduced another one in the engineering field called mechatronics, which is now a combination of the mechanical and electrical side. And it's more electronics, so it's more things, computers and PC drives and robots and things like that, which is the modern way to go nowadays. Most companies are doing away with the high-tense labor productions, and especially when we've got a volatile union force that we have. And I'm speaking a little bit out of turn maybe, but unfortunately, this is a crying shame to me, because if we did have the proper training, and we had the training that the Air Force gave, certainly I received, and certainly my peers that were in my era, I think we had fantastic training. Yeah.
I cannot agree with you more. And you know what? We've been speaking almost 3 hours now. And we will speak again, because we're going to get you onto that combined shows with flight engineers. It's going to be funny, because you people like to tell jokes, actually. It's fascinating to me. But can I ask you, Mike, the shirt you're wearing, what is it?
Okay. In 2016, the choppers, mainly the Pumas and the Alouettes, celebrated their 50th year in the South African Air Force. So we celebrated this 50th year of both those aircraft in operation in South Africa. And this is just your normal flight engineer's badge. So these T-shirts were made available. It's got no rank on them. The pilot will have his pilot wing, and this is just a nice embroidered badge that they designed, for that particular reunion. They had people from all over the world that went to that reunion. I think Stephen was there. I unfortunately couldn't be there, but unfortunately in 2016 I was diagnosed with lymphoma, cancer, and I started chemo for a year. And this particular reunion was in the middle of my my treatment. So there was no way that I was, couldn't go and attend it. I couldn't go, and I was just, too ill to go, with chemo treatment. But I'm glad to say that I'm 100% in remission. I'm now 5 years in remission. I go for my annual checks and everything's clear. So yeah, so at least that's one hurdle that I jumped successfully and gave it a kick.
I'm really glad to hear that you're all right now.
Yeah, it was quite funny. I mean, I didn't have a single hair on my body. So this was just a little bit of get back time.
We often hear about this cancer treatment. I've seen my father go through it as well. It's horrible. It takes a lot out of you. So for me to hear somebody who actually survived it and it's fine now, you know what? Fantastic. Really glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, you do have side effects, but those are just something you just live with. I mean, they're there and they're going to stay there, and you can't bypass them, unfortunately. And there's no medication for some of them. It's just something you have to live with. And I mean, I'd rather live with that than not be living. Put it that way.
That's what I always say to people here now at the end of this. Don't think age is not going to get you. You will have to come and talk to me. You will have to come and tell your story. We wouldn't know from this.
I always have the motto, I say, you're the good are young. That's why I'm still living.
Well, that's true as well. I've enjoyed this very much, Mike. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. As I say, you are coming back. I hope you're coming back. And if there's any questions for people, I'm sure they can leave it here below and we'll look at them. And for the rest of you, yes, we joke about age is going to get you, but seriously, really, it is so. We're at the age now where we have to start leaving our stories behind, or it's going to get lost, and that will be horrible. So until we meet again, God bless you.
Yeah, I just want to end with saying, to everybody out there, what you see is what you keep with you. When it's unpleasant, and I mean, I think that's been one of the hidden mottos of most flight engineers and pilots. We don't discuss it. We know we've been there, and we know that some of the guys have taken a bit of strain with it. But there's no, every one of those people that succumbed to their death belonged to a family. They had either brothers or sisters or mothers and fathers and uncles and aunties and all those things. And, it must have been a terrible time to lose a family member, in a conflict situation. So, I look at that and see, if we were in normal times, 90 or 95% of those people we would enjoy a beer with. So yeah, it's just something that we don't talk about, and I certainly don't talk about it. I mean, not even our kids know some of the stuff that I've done. Not even my wife knows some of the stuff that we've done. But that's for us to know.
During a time of war, a lot of things are done, and it's a good thing that not everything is told. But I've seldom see opposing groups hating each other afterwards. Normally they shake hands and understand the times.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.